This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate second and final part of What If Naruto Was the Son of Yami. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. No wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Zazie said, glancing at Naruto. Yeah, it is. He replied, but this time I will kill him. I won't let him hurt my precious people. Zazie inquired. Zazie grinned and leaned in to kiss Naruto after he nodded. Despite being caught off guard once more, Naruto didn't mind. He smiled at her as they started to distance themselves from one another and laughed, saying, give me a warning next time. You can't just kiss me whenever you like. Zazie sulked as she spoke. Grinning, Naruto drew her near. I know that. She grinned as she glanced at him. Okay. I take you on a date when we get back happy. Naruto addressed her. Zazie nodded and grinned at this. Good. He released her, sat up, and looked at her gravely before saying, the Teme is going down. The following day, in order to install barrier tags throughout the camp, Naruto had sent Zazie to bed a short while later. He finally fell asleep after confirming that everything was in order and that the girls would not be impacted in any way by the battle. A few hours later, he awoke to the aroma of cooking. Since he hadn't eaten in a day and a half, he realized he was starving. He rose and went in the direction of the odor. He woke up to the sight of the class making breakfast, and he couldn't help but smile as he observed everyone having a good time. Even if it meant losing his life, he was determined to protect this good group from any danger. He waved for Zazie to follow him into the forest after making sure everyone was enjoying themselves. Nodoka observed as they departed and followed to find out what was happening between them, while Zazie saw it and complied. With a strained sigh, Naruto stood in the trees, knowing that Sasuke would not harm Ayaka until they were facing each other. He had been concerned about her all night. Zazie noticed he was thinking deeply as she approached him. He smiled slightly at her when she placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Zazie said, smiling slightly at him. He said, thanks Zazie, which made the girl blush a little. Zazie asked, looking at him anxiously. Naruto replied, I really don't know, and sighed sorrowfully. He knew he would comply when Sasuke used Ayaka to protect him from attack, but he was at a loss for what to do. After noticing his concern, Zazie unwrapped her neck and gestured to her tattoo. She said confidently. He smiled and said, thanks Zazie, Zazie said to him. With a smile on his face, Naruto leaned closer and whispered something into her ear. Zazie listened intently despite blushing at this. Zazie drew him in and gave him another kiss as he retreated. She was unable to resist the urge to taste him. As they shared this moment together, Naruto kissed her back, not realizing Nodoka was observing them. Nodoka stood motionless as she watched her love kiss someone else, her heart breaking as she watched them share a kiss. He was lost to her, and she couldn't handle it. She didn't want to warn the two, but all she wanted to do was cry and flee. She ran deeper into the forest to cry after waiting for them to leave. While they waited for Naruto to arrive, Ayaka was unable to feel her wrist. Hatred gripped her as she watched her capture. He was the total opposite of Naruto. He was a nasty person who only cared about himself. Despite his awkwardness, humor, and compassion, Naruto always had others' best interests at heart. He would risk his life to save others. Sasuke, however, was only interested in getting even. He was aloof, heartless, and most importantly, conceited. His not coming, Ayaka remarked, observing Sasuke's search for Naruto. She believed that he would prioritize the other's safety over her own. After giving her a brief glance, Sasuke burst out laughing. His words, trust me, the Dobi will be here. Suddenly, a rustling came from the tree line across the street. Naruto appeared to be completely recovered and prepared to leave when he walked out. Sasuke looked at his vilified enemy and sarcastically said, hello Dobi, glad you could join us. After giving Sasuke a furious glance, Naruto remarked, I'm the one you want, let the girl go. Sasuke pulled out his sword and said, I'm sorry, but I can't. She is here to make sure you don't run off. Naruto pulled out his scythe and declared, I never run. At this, Sasuke grinned and launched an attack. Sasuke avoided Naruto's punch to the chest after he blocked his sword strike. Sasuke sidestepped the upward slash that Naruto delivered with his scythe and then used the kick to knock Naruto off balance. When he attempted to strike Naruto in the side, his fist struck the scythe pole instead. This pushed Naruto back, but Sasuke was more injured by the attack. As Sasuke persisted in his assault, he started to move more quickly, and Naruto followed suit. They quickly turned into a haze of hues. After a brief period of disengagement, they launched another attack. Knowing that they would be evenly matched, Sasuke was growing weary of this battle. Leaping back, he performed several hand signals. Kaden, giant fireball, he yelled and threw a massive ball of fire at Naruto from his mouth. Naruto sidestepped and began making his own hand signals. Futon. Wind blades, he yelled and hurled the wind's invisible blades at Sasuke. Sasuke retaliated with Kaden. Fire bullets, launching 5 medium-sized fireballs at Naruto, which the wind blades sliced in half. Naruto created a few cage bushes and targeted Sasuke with them as the attacks neutralized one another. Naruto ran in Ayaka's direction while Sasuke battled the clones. When Sasuke noticed this, he promptly sent out the clones and chased after Naruto. Sasuke knocked Naruto aside just as he was about to approach Ayaka. He grinned as he stood in front of his prisoner and turned to face Naruto. The ropes that bound Ayaka tightened as Sasuke said, "That won't do." He then made a few hand gestures. Ayaka's breathing became more difficult as she felt her breath leave her body. Sasuke stopped the ropes after saying, "I advise you not to try that again if you want her to survive." Naruto attacked him after glaring at him. Sasuke grinned as he got his wish. A furious Naruto. Sasuke was able to easily avoid Naruto's wildly aggressive attacks. As Sasuke saw an opportunity, he attacked by punching Naruto in the face. Naruto fell back and continued his attack, but nothing seemed to land. Ayaka observed that Naruto appeared to be concealing something while she watched him make foolish mistakes and become blinded by rage. Sasuke was being pushed farther and farther away from her tie by him. Anata no Maho o Hirageru, Kyasuda, spread you magic, caster, was whispered to her. Zazie, dressed in her Nightmare Circus stage costume, landed in front of her, but what really caught Ayaka's attention was the big 10-tailed fox around her neck. After grinning at her, Zazie called forth a kunai from the sky, severing her from her ropes. After glancing at Ayaka and indicating the tree line, Ayaka realized what Zazie was requesting and took off running. Zazie looked at the two fighters after observing Ayaka run away toward the trees. She said, pointing to Sasuke with 2 fingers. A flash of light, pale blue, blasted from the tips of her fingers and headed for Sasuke. Sasuke's only warning was when the attack was coming at him quickly, and Naruto leapt back as soon as he heard Zazie say the Hado. Dodging out of the way, he turned to see who had attacked. He killed Healer after spotting a girl dressed as a strange but seductive jester. The golden fox on her neck caught his attention. Sasuke looked at Zazie in disgust and said, "So you formed a pact." Without responding, Naruto launched his attack, but he abruptly leapt aside, allowing Sasuke to be struck by another lightning strike. Soon, Zazie and Naruto were combining their attacks. Zazie would launch the silent kiddos while Naruto would press Sasuke with weapons and taijutsu. Even though Sasuke quickly realized his disadvantage, he persisted in trying to kill Naruto, but the damn girl would always cast a spell on him whenever he got too close. He was unable to predict where she would fire next because he never heard a word leave her mouth. Naruto appeared and attempted to remove his head as he waited for the next blow. Sasuke ducked to avoid the blow, only to be kicked in the face. "Damn it," he exclaimed. When he rolled onto the ground and stood up, he noticed that Ayaka was no longer there and checked to see if he still had his trump card. He started to go over some hand signs, saying, "Damn. Kaden." Extreme fire wave. A wave of fire 10 feet high erupted from his mouth as he yelled. He directed it at Zazie and Naruto. When he saw the wave of fire approaching him, Naruto did the only thing he could think of to stop it. He yelled and made a massive wall of water. After seeing this, Zazie followed suit. The water turned to steam as the fire was extinguished during the conflict between the two attacks. Futon. Naruto pushed the steam away and remarked, "Great breakthrough." When he and Zazie searched for Sasuke, they discovered that he had fled. Looking around the battlefield, Naruto thought, "Damn him." The tree line was pushed back a few feet in some places, and there were craters all over the place. Naruto yelled, "Ayaka," and searched for her. When Ayaka heard her name, she emerged from hiding and saw Naruto and Zazie standing a short distance away. She rose and sprinted in their direction. As Naruto put his arm around her in an attempt to calm her, she reached them, wrapped herself around him, and began to cry. "I was so scared," she said through her tears. Zazie felt a twinge of jealousy as she watched, but it soon subsided and was replaced by worry for her friend. It took Ayaka a few minutes to feel secure in Naruto's embrace. "You ready to go?" Naruto asked, and Ayaka nodded, and he was relieved to see that she was okay. The amusing thing was that Ayaka would release his arm as Naruto began to walk back towards the campsite with Zazie and Ayaka in tow. They didn't realize a ghost was observing them as they made their way to camp. Nodoka was astounded by what she saw as she watched them go. As she watched them save Ayaka, Zazie started to question, who or what is Naruto? Naruto had accomplished things that no human could. She was curious, but she was also curious about how she could become like Zazie in order to be with Naruto. She told herself, I will keep trying, as her confidence grew. Ayaka, Zazie, and Naruto entered the camp and were embraced by their anxious classmates. Ayaka gave Naruto a shady look and held her arm in agony as they approached. Prior to reaching camp, a flashback Naruto paused and let out a sigh, recalling what he had told the class, that they would become suspicious if Ayaka returned without any signs of an injury. Naruto watched Ayaka comply as he said, Hey Ayaka, can you stop for a minute? Yes Naruto. Ayaka asked, glancing at Naruto and wondering what he wanted. I apologizing in advance for this, but we need to keep our stories the same, he replied to her. Ayaka stared at him in confusion, but when he grabbed her arm and applied pressure, she finally understood. Ayaka attempted to scream in agony as a loud snap sounded, but Zazie intervened and covered her mouth. Why in the name of Kami did you do that? Ayaka asked Naruto after giving him a murderous glare. She attempted to strike him, but her pain was too great. I told everyone you had gotten hurt in the fall and so I need to make you hurt, she heard him say, and that was the fastest way. Flashback ends. Although he could have broken her arm a little more gently, Ayaka knew he was correct. Luckily, the others hurried her over to Shizuna before she could give it any thought. Naruto observed the other students grinning and swooning over their wounded friend. Even though he had saved her, Sasuke had managed to escape, and Naruto knew that Sasuke never gave up. Before making his way to his tent for a well-earned nap, he told himself, this is going to get dangerous. While everyone was ogling Ayaka, Nodoka sat with her friends and watched Naruto, who was hanging toward the back. She was curious about his plans, but she was also curious about what she would do to catch his attention. Looking at Naruto, Yu noticed her friend lost in thought. She wondered what Nodoka was thinking about and what she could do to support her friend. The sudden question made Nodoka jump. Hey Nodoka, are you okay? Yu asked. Nodoka turned to face her friend and fought back tears, saying, I'm fine. Yu looked at her angrily and said, no you're not. Yu pulled Nodoka into an embrace as she began to cry as she turned to face her friend and said, I saw Zazie kissing him. Nodoka's heart hurt so much that she sobbed into her friends in silence. Yu waited for her to relax while stroking her hair. Nodoka sobbed for several more minutes before he stopped. What happened? Yu asked, glancing at her companion. Nodoka continued to explain the situation to Yu, omitting Ayaka's rescue. As Yu listened to Nodoka's story, she nodded and felt sorry for her friend, but she also felt hopeful for her. So Zazie kissed Naruto and not the other way around. Nodoka simply nodded, and Yu grinned as she asked to make sure her assessment was correct. Yu looked at her friend and shook her head before telling her friend, Zazie was the one who kissed Naruto, not the other way around, which means she likes him but he has yet to give her an answer. In response to Nodoka's perplexed expression, Yu said, then you still have a chance. Yu leaned in close and said, now hear what we are going to do. Nodoka looked at Yu with delight, knowing that she still had a chance. Stupid Naruto, Ayaka muttered to herself as she lay on her sleeping bag in the tent the other had set up for her. She was relieved to be safe but wished he hadn't broken her arm. Thinking back to the battle, she wondered what else Naruto was hiding. Naruto was a Shinigami, a soul reaper, someone who took people's souls, but he wasn't a bad person as all the legends and stories say. She said, well, his is different, and started to mentally enumerate all of his qualities. He is nice, caring, smart, funny, strong, and handsome. But then she stopped herself, asking herself, did I just call him handsome? I called him handsome, but why? She was debating this in her head when she realized that Naruto had gone into the tent and was now above her. To get the girl's attention, he said, Ayaka, but she appeared to notice. Earth to Ayaka. Ayaka blushed and tried to hide her feelings when she heard this and looked up to see the person who had been on her mind standing over her. What do you want? She tried to sound angry as she spoke. I was just curious if you were okay following everything that transpired. He sat down and asked her, his voice full of worry. I believe so, she answered, unsure of herself. After giving her a quick glance, Naruto said, want to discuss it? Ayaka wanted to talk about what had happened and thought Naruto would be the best person to talk to, but she stopped herself before she could say no. She simply nodded, and Naruto began to settle in. Ayaka glanced at him and grinned slightly. He was a decent man who always wanted to lend a hand, even if it meant damaging other people's property in the process. As her eyes started to well up, she finally recalled, I was scared. I was tied up and helpless. I couldn't stop him if he wanted to rape me, she said. I thought I never get to see anyone I cared for again. I was really afraid. Although he knew it was his fault for allowing her to be taken, Naruto made sure it wouldn't happen again by holding her in his arm while she sobbed. Ayaka sobbed for a few more minutes before continuing. I was afraid you wouldn't show up when we were waiting for you. I was overjoyed when you emerged from the woods, even though I had assumed you would prioritize the security of the others over mine. Gazing down at the weeping girl, Naruto grinned and told her, I never leave a precious person behind. I am precious person, Ayaka declared, somewhat taken aback. As if she were being stupid, Naruto said, of course you are. You, Zazie, Nodoka, and the entire class are precious to me. After spending some time with you, I realized that I am glad to be here, even though I initially thought I would hate this job. Thank you, Ayaka said, returning the hug. He stroked her hair and replied, you welcome. Naruto climbed out of his tent and stretched as the sun rose the following day. Everyone was safe and content, and he had no one attempting to kill him at the moment. He went down to the lake and let the morning breeze caress his skin, knowing that today would be a good one. He didn't see his favorite acrobat rise, but Zazie saw him standing close to the lake's edge and approached him. She tapped him on the shoulder, and he leapt into the water. Stay cold. He yelled as he leapt from the lake and returned to the shore, and Zazie just stood there laughing. Naruto then lifted himself off the ground and stuck his tongue out at her. Zazie chuckled. I'm glad you liked it, Naruto said, then grinned evilly at her. Zazie attempted to flee, but Naruto had her in his arms as he ran toward the water. Banzai. Zazie silently screamed as Naruto yelled and leapt, and then there was a splash of water and laughter. Zazie swam to the surface and gave Naruto a shady look. Zazie uttered upon noticing Naruto beside her. Zazie blushed as Naruto said, just enjoying the moment beautiful. He smiled and kissed her back as they floated in the water together. Zazie swam close to him and pulled him into a kiss. Later in the day after the swimming kiss, Yu was carrying out her plan to get Nodoka with Naruto. The first step was to get Naruto to focus on Nodoka and no one else. She and Haruna had gotten Nodoka into a bikini that revealed a lot of smooth skin, and Nodoka, wearing a light jacket to cover her body, looked at her friend bewildered. Are you certain that this will succeed? As she attempted to pull the jacket down lower, she asked them. With a smile and a thumbs up, Haruna said, of course no man can resist hot girls in a bikini. Nodoka nodded but left the jacket on, and the three of them made their way to the lake, where they discovered that most of the class was also wearing bikinis, with Mana and Keed standing out the most, which caused Nodoka to look at herself dejectedly. When Yu noticed this, she turned to Nodoka and said, it's fine. She was searching the shore for Naruto and found him sitting on the dock with Zazie and a few others. He was wearing a pair of black and orange board shorts, and Zazie was wearing a silver two-piece with a 10-tailed fox design. Nodoka and her friends were getting more and more nervous as they walked to the docks, and as they did, they saw Naruto performing tricks of the docks. He leapt high in the air, flipped 3 times, and then entered the water in a perfect dive. They watched Nodoka drooling as he emerged from the water, and they saw the water run down his toned body, and the light reflecting off the droplets, making him glow like a god. Nodoka stood there in a daze for several minutes, watching her crush. Yu waved her hand in Nodoka's face to check if she was in there, but she wasn't. She out of it, Yu said sadly, and they dragged the stunned girl to her crush. Zazie and Naruto were having a good time at the lake, competing to see who could do the best tricks. Thus far, they were dead even, and neither of them was giving up. Zazie smiled at Naruto, and she started to run, adding a front handspring as she went. She reached the edge of the dock and launched herself high in the air, flipping once before entering a tight spin, then back flipping and straightening out, splashing into the water. As he watched this, Naruto sighed and thought, damn, to himself. Naruto blushed as he watched the water run down her beautiful body after Zazie emerged from the water. Zazie said with a slight smile, and Naruto simply sighed. After he said, you win, Zazie grinned and took a seat at the edge, patting the space next to her while Naruto took a seat next to her. Gazing at him, Zazie said, you're the winner, he declared. I have to do anything you want when we get back to Mahora. Zazie smiled and said, great, Naruto thought to himself, fearing what Zazie would demand of him upon their return. The sound of footsteps filled the air as they conversed, and Naruto turned to see the 3 people from the library approaching them. A stunned Nodoka appeared to be being pulled toward Yu and Haruna. Zazie scowled as she observed this. She had noticed in class that Nodoka had a crush on Naruto. She wanted him all to herself when she looked at him. She came up with a plan as she considered it. Nodoka was just beginning to awaken when she realized they were close to Naruto. She fought back a big noise bleed as she gazed at his terrified chest. Naruto grinned as he turned to face her. He smiled and said, hi, making Yu smile a little and Nodoka melt. Hi Naruto, Nodoka said, concealing her face with her hair. Yu sighed inwardly as she turned to face her friend. Yu thought, she needs to be more aggressive, and he immediately devised a plan to get Nodoka to spend time alone with the blonde. When Haruna noticed Yu's thoughts racing, she made the decision to interfere while she awaited a strategy. In the hopes that Yu would think of something quickly, Haruna asked, "So Naruto, how are you enjoying the trip?" As he gazed out to sea, he remarked, "It's been good. There were a few bumps in the beginning, but it's going well now." While Nodoka stood in the back, too afraid to approach, Haruna said, "That's great," and carried on the small talk. She pondered, "What's wrong with me?" She had previously approached him back at the Mahora, but she could do it now. Yu grinned after concluding her thought. "I apologize, Nodoka," Yu said, feigning to trip and fall, sending Nodoka into the water. Naruto jumped in to help Nodoka, who was unprepared for this and struggled to reach the surface of the water. She couldn't stop her face from flushing as he got to her and lifted her up. He was there to support her at all times. He said, "Are you okay?" in a worried tone. Nodoka just nodded, not believing her voice. When they arrived at the dock, he allowed her to get up before boarding. Naruto blushed when he saw how completely soaked Nodoka was and how her white jacket hugged her skin, exposing her bikini. Yu chose to exploit this after noticing it. She approached Nodoka and spoke softly into her ear. As Nodoka listened to her friend, she flushed. To divert attention from her friend, Yu got up, went to Naruto, and struck up a brief conversation. As Nodoka watched, she noticed Zazie observing her. Nodoka carefully unzipped her jacket and removed it, not wanting to lose Naruto to her. She dropped it and approached Naruto at a leisurely pace. She brushed her hair away from her face and gave him a shoulder tap. When he saw the beauty in front of him, he turned beet red. Her baby blue bikini was a great way to highlight her features. Naruto thought, "She has a great body," as he observed her. Nodoka could see the blush on Naruto's face as he looked at him. There was silence between them as she also flushed. With a sigh, Yu followed her friend and nudged her slightly. She landed on top of Naruto, who then fell into the water. Not being able to control her blush, Nodoka swam to the surface. In contrast, Naruto had become agitated and hot. He made the decision to remain in the water because he didn't want the girls to see him like that. After Nodoka had emerged from the water, he saw Naruto doing the same. She lowered herself so Naruto could see her cleavage clearly and sank further into the water. "Are you okay?" she asked, and all he could do was nod. As Zazie watched, she leaned down to see what was wrong with Naruto, which caused him to blush more intensely and submerge himself deeply in the water. Zazie inquired worriedly. He swam as fast as she could from the dock after saying, "Just want to take a swim." Zazie grinned as Nodoka watched this in bewilderment. After seeing her face, she realized what was wrong with Naruto. Yu was pleased for her friend and also recognized what was wrong with Naruto. As Yu watched the blonde swim at incredible speeds to the other side of the lake, she remarked, "If she can do that to him, then she has a chance." Naruto sighed as he sat by the campfire. As he watches Nodoka and Zazie prepare dinner, he murmurs to himself, "These damn girls are getting me all hot." He tried to keep his thoughts from wandering to him doing inappropriate things while he observed the girls. He muttered, "Damn arrow. Senin," and turned away. As she watched this, Zazie grinned and a plan began to take shape in her head. She made the decision to carry out her plan as the evening wore on. Leaning into Naruto, she took a seat beside him. Naruto froze and flushed. He asked, "Zazie, what are you doing?" Zazie answered, and Naruto began to cry inside. He begged, "What do you mean that you're tired?" as Zazie raised her head to meet his. Zazie pouted and said, he said, no, and she grinned. With a smile, Zazie put her arms around him and said. As everyone watched, they were taken aback by Zazie's audacity. Envious, Nodoka watched this. Yu glanced at her friend before nudge. Pointing to Naruto's side. Nodoka shook her head no, blushing. "You're going to lose him to her if you don't do anything," Yu told her friend, and Nodoka remained quiet. She could simply nod and argue with her line of reasoning. She got up, took a seat beside him, and followed Zazie's example. Naruto tried not to blush as he felt her beside her. He begged, "Oh, crap. Stay down," as his body responded to these. After observing Naruto's attempts to maintain self-control, Zazie made the decision to step it up. She embraced him, putting her arms around his neck. Naruto was unable to act because he was so red. Everyone is watching this with curiosity. Both the bookworm and Zazie, the quiet one, were cuddling up to Naruto. This was not what they had anticipated from Kid and Haruna, but they never did this type of thing. "Wow," Shisame said, taking in the sight. Naruto was engrossed in the joy of being close to the girls as he gazed at them. Everyone was prepared to return to Mahora when the time came. It was terrible at first, but it worked out okay, Naruto had to admit. When Sasuke arrived, things took a turn for the worse, but otherwise, everything went really well. He had struck a deal with a stunning girl, rescued another stunning girl, and grew quite close to yet another stunning girl. He claims it was a humiliating success all around. As she watched Naruto assist in loading the bus for the return trip to school, Zazie grinned. The trip made her very happy. She had developed a stronger bond with Naruto than any other girl, and the two even made a deal. She grinned as she felt the warmth emanating from the tattoo and touched her neck. She was eager to return to Mahora so they could go on the date he had promised. She intended to use the promise he had given her at the dock to become very close to Naruto. Nodoka couldn't help but smile as she sat with her friends. In the hopes of becoming closer to Naruto, she had gotten closer to him. Yu had already made plans to bring her closer to her crush and was thrilled for her friend. Ayaka was standing with a sling on her arm. Although she was glad to be going home, she felt as though she should just go. She wanted to learn more about Naruto after getting to know him better. He was constantly worried about her welfare because he had rescued her from Sasuke. She blushed as she observed him at work. She would actually get to know him quite well. Naruto was relieved to be back in bed after a few days. Something near him caught his attention as he opened his eyes. Turning, he saw Nodoka lying beside him. It had started to happen again after the trip. Rewind. Naruto was glad to be back in the room on the first night following the trip. He was wearing pajama pants and had taken off his shirt to get ready for bed. He did not realize the girls were observing him as he lay down to sleep. Before speaking to Nodoka, Yu made sure he was asleep and said, "He right there, you need to make your move." Nodoka simply shook her head and flushed. Yu frowned and tried to come up with a plan to help Nodoka come out of her shell. With a look of horror on her face, Yu said, "If you don't do this, then no new books for a month." "You wouldn't," Nodoka uttered in surprise. Yu shoved Nodoka in the direction of the blonde and said, "Try me." Naruto was already sound asleep when Nodoka stumbled and fell. When she turned to face her friends again, they waved back at her. With a sigh, Nodoka approached Naruto in silence. She blushed deeply as she watched him sleep. He appeared so content to her. As he turned, Naruto pulled Nodoka down on top of him, his arm dangling off the side of his bed. He felt her, but he locked his arms around her and drew her near to him. Nodoka flushed profusely and tried to get away, but was unsuccessful. Consequently, she smiled and accepted her fate. Flashback ends. She had willingly crept over to Naruto's bed and laid down after that night. Gazing at the sleeping girl beside him, Naruto let out a sigh. He couldn't help but be drawn to her because she had such a serene appearance. He simply reclined and observed her sleeping. Nodoka slowly woke up as the sun struck her face. Her favorite blonde was lying beside her when she regained consciousness. Despite her blush, she was glad he was there. He was awake when she looked at him. As she gazed into his eyes, she wondered, was he watching me sleep? She was as literate as a tomato. "You were very cute when you sleep," he said, smiling as he leaned in close to her. The comment caused Nodoka's brain to overload, and she eventually fainted from joy. After giving her a forehead kiss and grinning, Naruto got out of bed. Grinning, Naruto entered the headmaster's office. He felt that the day would be good because he had had a good morning. Naruto sat down in front of Kano, who asked, "Naruto, how are you?" With a grin, Naruto answered, "I am doing great, and the trip was a great success." After a brief pause, Kano gave Naruto a serious look and said, "But I would like to talk about the kidnapping incident." Kano nodded and grinned, adding, "I am glad you and the class enjoyed it." With an inward sigh, Naruto explained what had happened. Kano paid close attention to the young blonde's words. He was initially concerned, but after hearing the blonde's story, he realized that hiring him was the right choice. After concluding the story, Naruto awaited Kano's reply. After being silent for a while, Kano smiled and said, "Now then, what do you think of my granddaughter? I am glad the matter was resolved." After giving Kano a quick glance, Naruto said, "I'm going now." But Kano attempted to interrupt, but Naruto ignored him. Someone tried to grab him from behind as he was leaving the office. His reflexes took over, and he ducked as the person reached for him, then took hold of the assailant's arm and threw them against a wall. He sensed a familiar presence close by as he turned to face his assailant. "Chachimaru," he told her, turning to face her. With a hint of red on her cheek, Chachimaru stood there and smiled at him. "Hello Naruto," she said, trying not to blush. "How have you been?" she asked. He laughed and remarked, "Doing great, just dodged another feeding frenzy." "What makes you say that?" Chachimaru asked, staring at him in confusion. "If you're here, then the one lying at the base of the wall was Evangeline," he said, laughing as he glanced at her. Chachimaru merely gave a nod. and Naruto turned to leave. She took as many photos as she could while keeping an eye on him. She had been reflecting on what had happened in the forest prior to his departure while he was away on the trip. She kissed him on the mouth after he had given her a hug and a cheek kiss. She didn't know what had happened next because she had fled before he could say or do anything. She started making plans to approach the blonde as she picked up her unconscious master. Not only for her master, but also for herself. Ayaka entered the classroom and took a seat. The camping trip had been over for a few days, and classes had resumed. She was excited to spend time with a specific person and was glad to be back. She was extremely frustrated because she hadn't been able to get closer to Naruto since they had returned. As she waited for the others to arrive at class, she asked herself, why is one blonde so hard to find? Everyone soon entered, with Negi following closely behind. After hearing about the trip, Negi was happy to see that everyone had a good time. He hoped that Ayaka had gotten closer to Naruto. He approached her with a smile on his face and said, "How are you today, Ayaka?" Ayaka grinned as she glanced at the younger boy. While she watched the door out of the corner of her eye, she smiled and said, "I'm doing fine." According to Negi, "That's great. So how was the camping trip?" Nodoka's face flushed slightly, and she was silent for a while. As she put it, "It was fun." He said, "Well, I'm glad you had fun," she said, "Yeah," as soon as she saw Naruto enter the room. As she turned to face Negi, she said, "Nice talking to you, sensei." She rose and approached Naruto. She smiled as she said, "Morning, Naruto." After giving her a smile, he replied, "I'm doing well." She smiled and said, "That's great." She blushed as she met his eyes. "Would you like to hang out later?" This took Naruto by surprise, but he just shrugged it off. The words, "Sure, I'm game," made Ayaka smile. Upon hearing the bell, she said, "I'll see you after class," he said as he made his way to his window. Facing chair, "It's a date." He was unaware of Ayaka's reaction to those words. She muttered as she made her way back to her seat in a daze, a date. Ayaka discovered Naruto standing by the quad fountain as the school day came to an end. She thought he was at peace. She approached him and stood next to him. She drew him out of his reverie with the words, "Hi." He turned to face her and said, "Hey." He tried not to blush as he gazed at her. The way her long blonde hair cascaded over her gorgeous figure made her look stunning. Ayaka blushed when she noticed that he was staring. "Are we going somewhere or are you going to just stare?" she asked, turning to face him. "Of course we are," Naruto said with a smile. She pulled him along and said, "Good, let's go." They continued down the street until Ayaka stopped in front of a small restaurant, which Naruto checked out and discovered served French food. "Come on," Ayaka said as she and Naruto walked into the restaurant, waiting for a waiter to seat them while an awkward silence descended between them. Ayaka glanced at Naruto and attempted to speak, but her voice was not working. She thought to herself, "Why can't I say anything?" She wanted to know Naruto, but here she was, standing beside him like a shy rabbit. She was Ayaka Yukihiro, and she had the ability to talk to a boy and bring entire companies to their knees. As she opened her mouth to speak, Naruto interrupted, asking, "Where did you find this place?" Appreciating that he initiated the conversation, Ayaka responded, "I found it last year before Negi became our teacher." They fell back into silence after Naruto said, "That's cool." A waiter then appeared and escorted them to a private booth, where they perused the menus while Ayaka tried to think of something to say to him once more. "How are you doing now?" Looking at him over her menu, she finally said. Without raising his gaze from his menu, Naruto answered, "I'm doing fine." She remarked, "That's nice," as the silence between them once more subsided. Even though she knew that every scar had a very depressing story to go with it, she couldn't bring herself to say anything to him as she watched him order their food and wondered what had happened in his life. As they waited for their food, Naruto, who was growing weary of their constant silence, asked, "Is there something bothering you?" When he looked at her, Ayaka turned her head to face him and tried to wave it off, saying, "Of course not." He didn't like how she sidestepped the question and said, "Yes, there is." Ayaka sighed in defeat when she realized she couldn't get him to drop it. She started, but she quickly fell silent. With a sigh, Naruto shook his head and said, "It's okay, I won't get mad at you." Naruto studied the girl intently, seeing that she wanted to ask a question but was too scared to speak. "Really?" Ayaka watched and grinned at her as she spoke softly. Ayaka blushed as he said, "Of course not, I can't get mad at a beautiful girl like you." Satisfied with this response, Ayaka remained silent for a while before glancing at him and asking, "What are you exactly?" Looking at the girl, Naruto laughed and said, "Trying not to laugh, that's what you wanted to know." Ayaka gave him a furious look but maintained her composure. "Yes, it is." "Why?" Wondering why she was asking, Naruto questioned her. I have never seen anyone able to do that, so I wonder what are you, Ayaka said after a few minutes of silence. When I was captured by Sasuke, he showed me the battle that you and 9 other defeat him in. She was asking sincere questions, clearly wanting to know what he was, and Naruto smiled and said, okay, I tell you. Looking at him, Ayaka assumed he would have declined her request. Really? She said. I am what you call a Shinigami, or Soul Reaper if you will, he said, laughing. Yes, really. It is my responsibility to gather deceased people and transport them to their rightful place of rest. She asked a few questions, but mostly she just listened to him explain everything he thought she should know. She was fascinated by his explanation, never realizing that there were people like Naruto going out into the world and helping souls, and she watched as he explained, feeling grateful that he was the one there for them. Their food came and went as they talked, and soon they were leaving and returning to the dorms. Ayaka stood beside him as they walked, her face slightly flushed. Are you interested in anything else at this point? As they strolled, he asked her. After giving it some thought, she replied, not really. Naruto nodded, and they continued walking in silence until they arrived at the dorms, where Naruto escorted her to her room. He told her, have a great night, and turned to go, but she took her arm. When Naruto turned to look at her, she said, wait. Yes? He inquired. She blushed and said, I was wrong earlier for kicking you out. Her words caught Naruto off guard. I was wondering if you would move back in with me. Naruto stood silently in front of her, thinking, damn. He was content with his new home but unsure of how to respond to Ayaka. He grinned and gave her a cheek kiss before saying, let me sleep on it. The fact that he kissed her on the cheek left Ayaka speechless, and she stood motionless outside her door while Naruto left. As Zazie watched Naruto from her desk, she noticed 3 other people staring at him. He already suspected Nodoka and Ayaka, but Chachimaru was new to her. She was happy that she was the one closest to him and couldn't wait to have him all to herself. As she observed her competitors glancing at her fox, she scowled and said, she couldn't wait for class to end, she thought. Ayaka asked him to move back in with her last night, but he was currently rooming with Nodoka. Naruto felt the pull of his pact as he debated with himself, and he turned to face Zazie and saw that she was staring at him. He could see the longing in her eyes. He grinned to himself and waited for class to end. Waiting for everyone to depart as the bell rang, Naruto materialized beside Zazie, drawing her near and whispering in her ear, miss me? Leaning into him, Zazie wrapped her arms around his neck and replied. His smile said, really now, then shall we go? Zazie nodded, and they left the room. Naruto led her to the base of the world tree, but he picked her up bridal style and carried her to the top branches, where she blushed and leaned her head against his chest. To her, this was heaven. They were together, and that was all that mattered. When they arrived at their destination, Naruto tried to put Zazie down, but she refused to let go, wrapping her arms around his neck and refusing to let go. Naruto sighed in defeat, and sat down with his back against the tree trunk. The clone saluted and left the two alone, and they sat and watched the day go by. Are you having fun? As they sat there, he asked her. Zazie said, grinning as she saw him. He told her, that's great. When he saw that the food had arrived, he was given a basket, and the clone vanished. Zazie gazed at the basket in awe as Naruto took out a variety of sandwiches and other food. Her face lit up with pure joy as she took a bite of the sandwich after looking at the food. I finished the sandwich, she said. Glad you like it. Naruto grinned and picked up one, but Zazie stopped him before he could put the sandwich to his lips. She took the sandwich from him and broke off a small piece, saying, with a seductive smile. Naruto obeyed, and she fed him the piece. When he saw that Zazie had a small piece of the sandwich on her finger, Naruto leaned in and licked it off, and when she blushed, he took another sandwich and broke off a piece, saying, your turn. They ate all the food together, and when it was all gone, Zazie leaned in and kissed him back, pulling her close as the sun set. She said, after breaking the kiss, he kissed her and said, always. She said with a smile as she broke the kiss. They walked hand in hand, but as they got closer to their destination, they parted ways, and Naruto grinned as he led Zazie to her door. He kissed her again and they remained in each other's arms for a few more minutes before returning to the dorms. He turned to go, but Zazie stopped him. I see you later, he said. She said, yeah, he said. With a smile on her face, she said. He replied, yeah, I always keep my promises, and Zazie's smile widened. She said to him, which made Naruto uneasy. And it is? Afraid of her response, he asked. She pulled him into a kiss and said, before entering her room. After standing outside the door in shock, Naruto said, I am so screwed, and turned to return to his room. As he walked into his room, Naruto sighed, unsure of what to do. Ayaka and Zazie both asked him to move in with them, and he knew he would have to make a decision. He was content living with Nodoka and the others, but he made a promise to Zazie. He simply sighed to himself, went to his clothes, and started packing. Nodoka noticed and approached him, curious about what was going on. "Why are you packing, Naruto?" she inquired. As the night went on, Nodoka grew more concerned about what was happening, and as she sat on her bed waiting for Naruto to go to sleep, she failed to notice him enter the room and glance at her. "I tell you in the morning," Naruto said, dismissing the question. He called out, "Hey," which caused the girl with the blue hair to jump a little. "Yeah?" she stumbled. "Are you coming or not?" Nodoka was shocked and simply let him lay her down on the bed. He asked her, and she gave him a perplexed look. He simply sighed and walked over to her, picking her up off the bed and moving toward his. He then got in and put his arms around her, drawing her close. He said, "That's better," and turned to go to sleep. She was about to ask him what he meant, but he was already asleep, so Nodoka just nodded and then heard him murmur, "I'm going to miss this." She pulled him to her and hoped that this was not the end of it. With a heavy heart, Naruto got out of bed and finished packing his belongings as the sun came through the window. He didn't want to get out of bed because he was getting comfortable around Nodoka and didn't want it to end, but he did promise Zazie. Slowly waking up, Nodoka saw that her large, powerful teddy bear was gone, and when she sat up, she saw him packing everything he owned. "What's happening?" She spoke to him anxiously. She could see the sadness in Naruto's eyes as he turned to face her. "I'm moving out," he said, then resumed packing. "Why?" Trying not to cry, Nodoka asked. Nodoka started to cry but ran after Naruto as he continued packing and said, "I'm sorry," before heading out of the room with his bags. She watched him head for the school building and made a self-promise to find out why he was leaving. Naruto sighed as he sat by his window, remembering that he had a bad morning and that he had left Nodoka without explaining his reasons. He saw that Nodoka was approaching him with a determined expression on her face as the class entered. As Nodoka faced him, Naruto thought, "Oh crap." She yelled loud enough for everyone to hear, "Why are you moving out?" Ayaka walked over and butted in before Naruto could explain, saying, "He moving back in with me." She believed he was moving back in with her. Zazie said to the other girls with a broad smile as Naruto opened his mouth to speak again. "No, he will remain with me." Nodoka drew Naruto near to her as she spoke. Then he was dragged over to Ayaka, who said, "No, he's staying with me," she yelled. After drawing Naruto close to her, Zazie wrapped her arms around him and said. Naruto was soon being pulled in 3 different directions after she said this, and he attempted to flee but was unable to get his hands together to pull off any justice. As the 3 girls shocked Asuna and Negi, who had never seen them act like this before, the rest of the class watched in wonder as Asakura pulled out her camera and took as many photos as she could for the paper. Kano, who wanted the fight to go on but came here for important business, walked into the classroom, watched what was happening, laughed to himself, and thought Naruto was lucky. "Quit now," he said in his loudest voice, causing all 3 girls to freeze in their place. He pointed at them and said, "You're 4, follow me now." After nodding, they all left the classroom, following the headmaster. After a long period of silence, Asuna exclaimed, "Wow." Naruto and the girls sat in silence in front of Kano's desk, and as he looked at the teenagers, he couldn't help but sigh. Naruto clearly cared for them, but he was unable to decide between them, and he knew that they all wanted him to live with them, so he was stuck with this dilemma. To clarify, you were arguing about who Naruto would share a room with, right? The girls merely nodded in agreement when he asked them. He turned to face Naruto and asked, "Did you decide who you wanted to share a room with?" Kano sighed and rubbed his forehead before an idea struck him. Naruto shook his head no. He grabbed their attention with the words, "I have a solution," and they all stared at him while waiting. Kano, pleased to see that they were paying attention, went on, "All you are going to room together." After a brief period of silence, 2 girls exclaimed, "What?" and Zazie added. While all 3 were in the room, Naruto listened in a daze, both happy and terrified of what was about to happen. Kano put up his hand to stop the 3 girls from talking at once, saying, "You 3 room together win him or not room with him at all." After the 3 girls nodded, he grinned and said, "Now that is settled," turning to face Naruto. "Yes?" said Naruto as he jolted out of his reverie. Kano smiled knowingly and said, "There is someone here to see you." A voice said, "Oh Naruto," from behind them. "Mom," Naruto exclaimed as he turned and stood there in shock. Naruto's mom made the 3 girls standing beside him turn to look at her. A woman in her late 20s to early 30s approached them, and they watched in awe. She had striking blue eyes, long silver hair, and a body that would make women envious and me drool. She said, "My little boy," as she approached Naruto. Naruto grinned and said, "Hi mom," but he was immediately dragged into a hug that crushed his bones. She remarked, "I miss you so much," while her son struggled to breathe. He stammered, "Can't breathe," as his face started to flush. Yami grinned and quickly released her son, saying, "Sorry, force of habit." Naruto sighed and pulled into another hug, whispering, "It's okay." Zazie, Ayaka, and Nodoka looked on in wonder. Even after giving birth to their crush, this woman maintained her attractive appearance. All Ayaka could say was, "Wow." The other girls nodded. For several more minutes, they observed the mother fussing over her son. As Kano watched, he made an effort to contain his laughter. He tried to regain everyone's attention by saying, "Excuse me." As she drew Naruto near to her, Yami turned to face Kano and looked at him gravely. "I'm trying to bond with my son." Kano started to say, "I can see that but Yami interrupted. As Naruto started to feel blue once more, she remarked, "I haven't seen him in a long time and I want to spend time with him." Naruto went limp as she gave the order, "Now butt out." She exclaimed, "My baby," and started shaking him. As Nodoka watched Yami attempt to resuscitate her son, she asked, "Are you sure they're related?" Naruto opened his eyes slowly and peered around. He smelled the disinfectant and saw the white walls. "Where am I?" he asked, surveying his surroundings. Ayaka was seated beside him. "I'm glad you're okay," she said to him as she watched him sit up. "We took you to the nurse's office because you passed out at the headmaster's office." "Thanks," Naruto said, holding his head up. "I had the most bizarre dream." He was asked by Ayaka, "What happened in your dream?" After giving it some thought, Naruto laughed and said, "I was dreaming that my mom was here and she was hugging me to death." Ayaka said, Naruto," to get his attention. "Yeah?" he inquired. Taking a serious look at him, she said, "That wasn't a dream." "You're joking, right?" Naruto said, hoping that Ayaka was playing a practical joke on him. However, his momentary awe was short-lived as the door opened and someone yelled, "My baby." His mother was holding Naruto close, suffocating him once more. In an attempt to get her to let go, he thrashed around frantically and tapped her hard. Ayaka yelled, "He can't breathe," which made Yami release her son. Naruto took a deep breath and expressed gratitude for the assistance. With a sheepish glance at her son, Yami said, "Sorry." "It's okay, you're just happy to see me," Naruto said with a smile as he turned to face his mother. "I missed you so much," she said as she held him close as she gave him another hug without crushing him. He gave her a hug in return and said, "Me too." They grinned at one another after releasing their embrace. Naruto asked Yami, "So what brings you here?" as he climbed out of bed. In an attempt to dismiss the inquiry, Yami replied, "I can't just come visit my son whenever I want." Naruto said, trying not to become irritated, "Mom, I need a vacation," she said, grinning as she glanced at her son. Naruto began to say, "But what about?" but Yami interrupted him. She smiled and said, "It's okay, I have my most reliable assistant taking care of things." Naruto said, "Please don't tell me you just left a note and ran off," but Yami smiled sheepishly, which made him sigh. In hell, Helios was examining a pile of documents while seated at Yami's desk. When he arrived, he discovered a note with the words, "Gone to visit my little kitsune, be back in a few days." A chibi illustration of Yami kissing him was on the bottom. He griped and carried on with his work, asking himself, "Why didn't I become a doctor like my mother told me to?" A return to Mahora Evangeline and Chachimaru stopped Naruto and Yami as they were leaving the nurse's office. Not in the mood for her outbursts, Naruto paused and scowled at the little blonde. "What do you want, Chibi?" he asked. Evangeline began to ask, "Why you?" but Chachimaru calmed her down by placing a hand on her shoulder. With a sigh, she released her anger as she turned to face Naruto and said, "I am here to give you your new room key." "All right," Naruto said, turning to face Chachimaru. "Do you have it?" he asked, hoping. Evangeline smiled and held out her hand as Chachimaru shook her head no and gestured toward the vampire. "You want it, come get it," she said. He turned to go, but Yami stopped him. "Well, that's too bad, I just picked the lock," he said. She said, "Just take the key," to him. He began to say, "But Mom," but Yami interrupted. Naruto nodded in surrender as Yami commanded, "No buts, get the key." Naruto walked slowly toward Evangeline after turning to face her. As fast as he could, he reached for the key, but Eva closed her hand. She said, "You're going to have to get closer," grinning slyly. As Naruto approached and extended his hand to grasp the key, Evangeline seized his arm and proceeded to bite him. Yami was on the ground laughing uncontrollably as Naruto yelled, "Damn vampire." and attempted to yank her away. She could never resist the opportunity to see Naruto lose his temper because she was aware of his fear of vampires. The only person who saw the woman laughing was Chachimaru, who approached her. She said to Yami, "Hello, my name is Chachimaru, and you are?" "Oh," said Yami, trying not to laugh, "I'm Naruto's mother, Yami. It's nice to meet you." As she watched Naruto swing Evangeline into a wall in the hopes that she would release her grip, Chachimaru remarked, "It is a pleasure to meet you as well." Yami asked Chachimaru, "So, how long have you known my son?" As he attempted to pry the young blonde off his hand, Naruto remained motionless, straddling her. Chachimaru responded, "Since he came to the school," blushing at the precarious situation Naruto and her masters were in. She snapped some photos so she could later use them to mock her master. "So how has he been treating you and the others?" Yami said with a smile and a nod. "He treats us quite well," she remarked, blushing as she recalled their kiss. Upon noticing this, Yami grinned and thought, "Well, someone is in love," thinking with delight, "I'm going to have grand babies." She turned to face Chachimaru and asked, "So what do you think of my son?" The question, "What did you think of Naruto?" startled Chachimaru. He was kind and attractive, and she believed that he was a good man who looked out for others and never gave up. "He's a good person," she said, blushing slightly. Yami grinned as she watched this. "Yeah, he is." Yami smiled as she turned to see Evangeline straddling Naruto. Eva was nearly full after they had been fighting for a while, and Naruto was furious that a vampire had bitten him again. With a small groan of pleasure for her feeding, Evangeline released his hold on him. "Thanks for the meal," she said, smiling lustfully at him. He yelled, "Damn vampire," and hurried to his feet, grabbing Evangeline by the collar of her shirt before hurling him out the window. Evangeline screamed as she shot through the air, but Naruto's blood gave her enough strength to land safely. A bird struck her as she was ready to choose her landing spot, causing her to lose focus and fall to the ground, landing in the lake once more. Chachimaru and Yami watched the scene unfold back at the main school building, and Yami couldn't stop laughing. Naruto turned and gave her a shady look as she collapsed to the ground, laughing, saying, "It's not funny." "Yes, it is," Yami replied, still laughing. Chachimaru couldn't help but smile as he observed the mother and son pair. She turned to face them and said, "I be taking my leave." Yami stopped her as she was about to leave. Chachimaru flushed when Yami said, "If you want a chance at my son you better get going." Chachimaru answered, What are you talking about?" shielding her blush. When Yami noticed Naruto approaching them, she grinned and said, "You know what I am talking about." She then turned to leave after grinning at the flushed girl. In his new room, Naruto and Yami were unwinding. Although Naruto was happy to see his mother enjoying herself, he was concerned about the potential trouble she might cause him. With a smile on her face, Yami asked her son, "So tell me, have you gotten with any of the girls?" "Mom!" Naruto exclaimed as he glanced at her. Looking at him impatiently, she said, "You didn't answer my question." He said, "There is nothing to answer," in the hopes that she would stop. "So you're telling me that you haven't gotten close to any girl at all, even though you were at an all-girls school?" Yami said, scowling as she glanced at her son. "No," he said. With a dejected expression on her face, Yami exclaimed, "Oh no, my son bats for the other team." She began to sob and pulled out a photo of Minato, asking herself, "Where did I go wrong?" "I am not gay," yelled Naruto. Yami smiled at her son and laughed, saying, "I know, just playing with you." Sighing, Naruto shook his head and said, "You and your jokes." Yami said, "You're just an easy target," and stood up. "I going to take a shower." "All right," Naruto sighed, "I begin with lunch." Yu and Haruna came into the room as Nodoka was packing her belongings. They wondered what was going on as they glanced at their friend. They had been concerned about what had transpired ever since she had visited the headmaster's office. When Yu approached her, he asked, "What's going on?" Her words, "I'm moving in with Naruto," came as she was still packing her belongings. "What do you mean moving in with Naruto? Doesn't her already stay here?" Haruna asked, looking at her in confusion. Nodoka looked at them and replied, "He was moving out and was going to move in with Zazie, but since we got in a fight over it, headmaster made use all room together." Yu nodded as she glanced at Nodoka. She was happy to be in charge of getting Naruto but disappointed that she was leaving. She hugged her friend and smiled, saying, "I am happy for you." Haruna joined Nodoka in giving her a hug in return. When Nodoka said, "I'm going to miss rooming with you," it was with regret. Staring at their friend, Yu and Haruna grinned and said, "We'll be fine," with Haruna nodding. "All you need to do is focus on getting Naruto." Nodoka firmly stated, "I will," making her friend proud. Yu said, Now let's get you over there and with Naruto, and then she began assisting Nodoka with packing. Nodoka, Zazie, and Ayaka arrived at their room simultaneously. Ayaka grinned as she surveyed her rivals. She thought, I can easily beat these girls, as she plotted to take Naruto. The three girls did not budge as they glared at one another. Finally fed up with the stare down, Ayaka said, he minds so back off. Zazie smiled as she glanced at Ayaka and Nodoka. She would be the one to defeat Naruto. He and she had made a lifelong soul joining pact. A woman screamed and there was a crash as Nodoka and Ayaka stood there trying to figure out what had just been said. After forgetting their altercation, they hurried into the room to investigate when they noticed Naruto lying on top of the woman they believed to be his mother, who was wearing a bath towel. Ayaka yelled, "What the hell is going on here?" with all her might. Rewind to the room where the fight took place. Naruto was standing by the table, arranging the lunch plates. He had prepared thin cut steak over rice and seasoned it with a mixture of Spanish spices. He heard the bathroom door open as he was examining his handiwork. His mother emerged in a towel as he entered the living room. "Where are your clothes?" he asked hastily, not wanting to see her half naked. "They're in my bag," Yami said with a smile as she glanced at her son. He inquired, "Which is where?" After giving it some thought, Yami said, "I forgot." He turned to her and yelled, "What did you mean you forgot?" He quickly turns around again after realizing that she is only wearing a towel. With a smile on his face, Yami went to his dresser and took out one of his shirts. She said, "I'll wear this." Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto noticed his shirt and went over to take it from her. "That's mine, why don't you summon your bag like always?" he replied. "I would much rather wear this," Yami whimpered, removing the shirt from Naruto. Naruto sighed as he drew the shirt pack closer to him with a bit too much force after glancing at her. "You're just doing this to get on my nerves." They fell to the ground as Yami was drawn in his direction. As they fell, Yami let out a scream and twisted, landing on the ground with Naruto on top of her. Someone yelled as they lay there for a while. "What's the hell is going on here?" Flashback's conclusion. Naruto swiftly left Yami after glancing at the three girls. He was about to tell them what had happened when Yami interrupted him, saying, "It was an accident." She smirked as she got up and drew him in close, saying, "It's okay, we don't have to hide it now." "Hide what?" Ayaka inquired, and Zazie and Nodoka nodded in agreement. "That our relationship goes beyond simple mother-son," Yami responded, "We are lovers." The three girls all yelled, "What?" simultaneously. During this time, Naruto managed to break free from his mother's hold and heard her words. Naruto, how could you?" Nodoka exclaimed, breaking down in tears. "She is your mother." Naruto yelled, "It's not like that," but Yami intervened once more to make matters worse. She began to remove her towel after saying, "There is no need to lie." When Naruto noticed this, he tossed the shirt he was holding to her. "Mom." Yami and the girls took a seat on the couch. Furious, Naruto had hurried out of the room. Knowing she had gone a bit too far with her joke, Yami sighed. She sighed as she glanced at the three gloomy girls. At last, she said, "I apologize for making a fuss," which attracted the attention of the other three girls. "It's okay," Nodoka said quietly, not looking at her. Zazie stared at the wall and said nothing. Ayaka, however, was furious and yelled, "That was cruel, it's not okay." Yami controlled her rage as she glanced at Ayaka. Despite the fact that she was the goddess of death and could wipe these girls out with a wave, she knew how much they loved her son. She grinned as she glanced at the wall and reflected on Naruto's younger days. "It'd been such a long time since I spent any time with Naruto," she said. "Back then I didn't have to worry about much except taking care of my little boy." Rewind. Naruto, who is 5 years old, is led by Yami to play in the park. As they walked, he firmly grasped her hand. He was a little afraid because it was his first time leaving the palace. As they walked, he asked his mother, "Are we the way yet?" Yami grinned as she glanced at the young boy and leaned down to say, "Almost." She gave him a slight tickle. She tickled Naruto, who laughed out loud for several minutes. Before long, she came to a stop, and they started walking. Flashback ends. "Now he all grown up and works a lot," she continued. The three girls sighed as they turned to face Yami. They knew they couldn't continue to be angry with her. Even if she made jokes, she only wanted to spend time with her son. With her head lowered in embarrassment, Ayaka apologized for yelling at her. "It's okay," Yami said, turning to face the three girls. "So how well do you three know my son?" Zazie put her hand to the girl's neck and said. They blushed and paused before responding. Although Yami was aware of this, she chose to investigate it later. The words, "He saved me," Ayaka smiled, With a flush, Nodoka remarked, "He's a great guy." Yami grinned and remarked, "Well, if he has 3 gorgeous girls after him, he must have done something right." Each of the 3 flushed. Yami said, "So tell me about yourselves?" Before long, they were conversing as if they had known each other for years. After venting his frustrations, Naruto made his way to his dorm room. It hurt to see the expressions on Ayaka, Nodoka, and Zazi's faces, but he had calmed down enough to realize his mother was only kidding. He was going to try to find a way to make it up to the girls and apologize to his mother. He heard laughter coming from the living room as soon as he walked in. When he went to investigate out of curiosity, he discovered Yami surrounded by the girls who were looking at pictures of him when he was younger. "This was the time I took him treating and he dressed up as Batman," Yami grinned. "Isn't her cute?" Saying, "Oh, he is so precious," Nodoka grinned. Ayaka remarked, "He is so adorable," and made a mental note to try and get a set of photos for her so she could begin collecting them. Zazie gave a nod of agreement. At this, Naruto grinned and observed their admiration for his infant photos. When Yami said she was taking out his bathing photos, Naruto's smile abruptly turned to a frown. Naruto was aware that this was an excellent moment to introduce himself. "Hey," he said, acting as though he had just returned. The 3 girls said, "Naruto," and threw him to the ground. Naruto returned their hug with a smile. He looked at the 4 of them and remarked, "So it seems you 4 have been having fun." Before long, everyone was giggling as embarrassing tales about young Naruto were shared. Yami said she would spend the entire day with Naruto and the girls as she went to bed at the end of the day. Despite his smile, Naruto was a little alarmed and hoped that nothing crazy would occur. He said to himself, "Please let tomorrow turn out okay," and made his way to his bed. Nodoka waited for everyone to go to bed while keeping an eye on things. She was determined to be the only one to have another sexual encounter with Naruto. She grinned as she waited for the other to go to sleep, recalling all of the tales Yami had told about Naruto in his youth. She grinned and said to herself, "I hope one day I can hear her tell my kids about those times." After determining that the coast was clear, she made her way to Naruto's bed. "What are you doing?" someone asked as she was ready to open the door. Ayaka and Zazie were standing behind Nodoka when she turned around. Nodoka resembled a deer caught in headlights as he turned beet red. She got up quickly and said, "Nothing." "You were going to sneak into Naruto's room," Ayaka remarked. Nodoka stammered, "No," and failed to conceal her blush. Ayaka looked at her and said, "Oh no, you're not going in there without me." "Wait, what?" asked Nodoka. Unwilling to wait any longer, Ayaka dragged Nodoka with him and went into his room, only to discover Zazie curled up next to a dozing Naruto. They gave the other girl a furious look, but it was short-lived because they soon joined them in dreamland after getting into bed. Yami grinned as she observed from a corner during this time. She danced while whispering to herself, "I'm going to have grand babies." Chapter 11's conclusion. Omake. Naruto's vampire phobia. Age 6 Yami and Naruto were on a visit to a friend from another world. Not far away, Naruto saw a girl his age with silver hair playing with a ball. Naruto was bored and wanted to do something. He approached her to ask if she wanted to play. He said, "Hi," to get the girl's attention. She gave him a wary glance and said, "Hi. I'm Naruto. Yami, what's your name?" Naruto asked the girl, who blushed slightly, as he grinned. After giving him a long look, the girl said, "Mocha Blood Driver." "Nice to meet you, Mocha," he responded. "Do you want to play?" She declared, "I don't play with humans, I am not human." He humped back, "I am a Shinigami in training." Mocha remarked mockingly, "Sure you are." "Am too," Naruto answered. "Am not," teasingly said Mocha. "Or two, am not." "Or two, am not, or two, I prove it to you," Naruto said, glancing at her. He then pointed to a tree and said, "Bakudo number 4 Bakuri," before a tiny lightning bolt escaped his fingers. "See?" he said, grinning. "Okay then," Mocha said, grinning malevolently, "let's play." She threw the ball at him with all her strength. Naruto was struck in the face by the ball because he was unprepared for this. A small amount of blood escaped from his nose and he fell backwards. He was about to cry when he said, "That hurt," but Mocha was not listening. She was going crazy from the smell of his blood. She approached him and dropped to her knees beside him. After taking a whiff of the air, she gathered him in her arms and bit his neck. As Mocha sucked his blood, Naruto sat motionless. A few minutes later, she was done, leaving Naruto in complete shock. Mocha looked at Naruto as if he were a buffet and remarked, "If your blood tastes that good, I'm going to have to play with you more often." Naruto stood up and placed a hand over his neck. After giving the girl a quick glance, he ran at full speed and yelled, Mommy why. Age 12 once again, Naruto and his mother were traveling to a place called Cross Academy, and as they made their way there, he noticed that some of the people were dressed differently than the others. Naruto waited outside while Yami met with the headmaster, practicing fighting with his kunai when he saw a girl his age, blonde, and dressed in a white uniform approaching him. He watched her for a moment before returning to his practice, not even noticing that the girl had stopped to stare at him. Who is he? After giving it some thought, she approached him. She said, "Hi," glaring at Naruto and almost causing him to cut himself. "Hello, I'm Naruto Yami. Who are you?" Naruto questioned the girl. She introduced herself as, "I am Rima Toya," and Naruto nodded before beginning to rehearse but cutting himself in the process. Naruto mumbled, "Ow," and applied pressure to the wound. The girl, who had smelled his blood and was struggling to control herself, smiled at him. She approached him, pulled out a handkerchief, and said, "Here, let me help." She moved closer to Naruto as she applied pressure after Naruto took his hand away from the wound so the girl could place her handkerchief on it. She couldn't help but get another whiff of his blood, which was so intoxicating that she had never smelled such a heavenly and powerful blood before. When he saw this, he inquired, "Are you okay?" The girl smiled and said, "Just fine." She was very close to Naruto, who was starting to feel uneasy and was about to pull away when she pulled him into an embrace. He froze, wanting to forget the one time he had ever been hugged by a cute girl, but he shuddered as she pulled him in close and flashed her fangs. She whispers to him, "Just a taste," leaving Naruto perplexed, but he quickly realized what she meant when she bit him, sucking him dry once more while another vampire cleaned her mouth of extra blood. She smiled and said, "Thanks for the meal. I'd love to know you better." Naruto yelled, "Damn vampires," as he glanced at her. The blonde girl simply grinned and went to class after he attracted the attention of the other kids in white uniforms, and soon you could see him escaping from a swarm of them. 15 years old, after receiving a directive from Kami to ensure that the monsters in the school were acting appropriately, Naruto headed for the main building, scanning the area for any indications of a silver-haired girl. He had been informed that Mocha was enrolled in this school and he was afraid he would run into her. He muttered, "Damn vampires," as he was walking around campus and failed to notice a girl with pink hair approaching him. They soon collided and fell to the ground. "Ow," the girl uttered while massaging her butt. "Sorry about that," Naruto said as he got up and extended his hand. Before turning to face him, she said, "It's okay. Do I know you?" she inquired. After giving her a long look, Naruto said, "I don't think so." She nodded, and Naruto simply shrugged and went to the headmaster's place. Later, on his way to the bus stop, he saw something fly by and saw it was the girl from earlier. She was slightly injured, so he knelt down to help her, but a big tree was thrown at him. He picked her up and avoided it, but as he landed, he unintentionally pulled off her Rosario. Mocha's power came forth, and she transformed back into her original form, and Naruto watched in horror. Mocha grinned down at Naruto. She smiled, well, isn't it my friend Naruto?" And then she straddled him, pushed him down, and leaned in to drink her fill while Naruto just lay there motionless. "Why me?" As he felt his blood being drawn out, he thought. Naruto lay there while she cleaned her mouth and said, "Thanks for the meal." She then got up and took the Rosario from him before leaving. "Damn vampires," he yelled. When Mocha put on the Rosario, she grinned and said, "It's our little secret." The pink-haired Mocha was worried because she thought she had betrayed Sukune. Naruto yawned and tried to sit up, but he felt 3 people resting against him. He looked at the 3 girls and sighed as he raised his head and saw Nodoka, Zazie, and Ayaka sleeping next to him. He told himself, might as well go back to sleep, and he reclined and settled in. After waking up and beginning her morning ritual, Yami discovered Naruto was not awake. She went to his room and observed the 4 teenagers sleeping peacefully on the bed, feeling a little naughty and calling forth her camera. She muttered to herself, "Say grand babies," and snapped a photo. Nodoka woke up, curled up against Naruto, and refused to get out of bed. She whispered, "This is heaven," and a voice agreed with her. She turned to see Ayaka smiling on his other side, but they soon saw that Zazie was almost on top of him. The 2 girls were furious about the acrobat's location, but they didn't want to wake Naruto. Zazie stirred as Nodoka was about to wake up, opened her eyes, and gazed at Naruto's sleeping face before grinning and resting her head on his chest before drifting back to sleep. Lucky, both Nodoka and Ayaka muttered, and since neither girl was able to sleep again, they decided to make plans for the day's events. Yami had called Kano and Negi last night to inform them that they would not be attending class today, and despite their best efforts, Yami only needed to whisper something to get their consent. "What should we do?" Nodoka asked, glancing at the other blonde. As she reluctantly got out of bed, Ayaka responded, "Well, I have my game plan, you're on your own." Nodoka said, "Fine," a little too loudly but with conviction, waking Naruto. "Mom, I don't want to go to school today," he muttered as he struggled to sit up, waking Zazie, who began to rub her eyes. Upon seeing the three girls in his room, he grinned and said, "Good morning." Everyone said, "Morning," and rose to begin the day. He started to get out of bed, but Zazie interrupted him, saying. As Nodoka and Ayaka watched, they wondered what the silent girl had asked. "Not now," Naruto said, turning red. Naruto tried to fight off Zazie's cuteness by making a pouty face, but she pressed her attack and leaned in close so he could feel her against his skin. Must resist, he told himself. As she drew him in, she said to him, "Fine." He sighed, unable to resist her. Zazie smiled and leaned in close, kissing him passionately. Nodoka and Ayaka watched in horror as Zazie broke the kiss and grinned, then gave the other girls a beat that look before turning back to face Naruto and kissing him again before leaving for the restroom. Zazie had just kissed Naruto in front of them, and Ayaka stood there frozen, refusing to let that flexible floozy take her man. She approached Naruto and looked him in the eye, saying, "Kiss me." This made Naruto appear like a deer in headlights. "Return," he said, seeming perplexed. Confidently, she said, "Kiss me." After giving her a quick glance and leaning in to kiss her, Naruto and she shared a brief moment before parting ways. "Happy?" Naruto, who had just kissed two extremely attractive girls in one morning, asked, blushing. Ayaka said, "Very," with a smile and a lip touch before leaving. With a smile, Naruto turned to face a flushed Nodoka and said, "You also want one?" he asked, and she nodded quickly in agreement. He then went to kiss her, and Nodoka kissed him back, drawing him in close. They soon found themselves making out while wrapped in each other's arms, and they remained that way for a few more minutes before splitting up. Nodoka smiled and said, "Wow." With a broad smile on his face, Naruto muttered as he left his room, "It's always the quiet ones." Yami, who knew her son well enough to know that he was feeling pretty lucky to have three girls after him, noticed a big smile on everyone's face as they were all sitting down to breakfast. She smiled to herself and made plans to bring them closer together. Naruto noticed this smile and shivered. It was the "she was up to no good" smile. As he ate, he reflected, "This is going to be a long day." "So ladies, do you know any good places for shopping?" Yami asked, glancing at Ayaka. Ayaka smiled and said, "Of course, I know all the best shopping around here." "Good," Yami grinned, "because today is our shopping day." To their male companion's dismay, the three girls cheered, "Yeah." Naruto began to say, "Well, since you girls are going shopping, but Yami interrupted him. With an intense glare, she told him, "You're coming with." He hurriedly said, "Yes ma'am," which made his crushes laugh. Naruto followed slowly as Ayaka led the group down the boardwalk, showing them all the various stores, while Yami and the girls chatted excitedly. "Why me?" he thought, recalling his mother's last shopping trip, which ended with him bringing home at least 300 pounds worth of sealing scrolls. He suspected this time would be twice as bad. They soon came to a stop in front of a dress store, and Naruto hung back, hoping they wouldn't see him attempting to slip away, but Yami grabbed his collar and dragged him inside. She told him, "You're not going anywhere." "Who said they would be with me and the girls all day?" "I did," he uttered while shedding anime tears. After saying, "Now that's right, so take it like a man," she pulled him into the house. Naruto stood by a wall and sighed as he observed the various dresses hanging on the racks and watched as others browsed the racks and chose the ones they liked. A shopping clerk came over after noticing him. She smiled and said, "How are you today?" "Just fine," he sighed in response. As she observed Yami and the girls shopping, she remarked, "That's nice," adding, "You are such a nice guy to come and help with their shopping." To which Naruto replied, "Yeah, I didn't have a choice." "So you're not dating?" she surprised him by asking. Glancing at the clerk, Naruto grinned and said, "Sorry, I am taken." She looked at the girls and said, "Really that too bad, so which one is your girlfriend?" she asked. "That's for me to know," Naruto said with a smile as he glanced at the clerk. Knowing she wouldn't get anything from him, she sighed and went to assist the girls. It was going to be a long day, Naruto sighed. Unable to decide what to get, Nodoka stood next to a clothes rack. When Yami realized this, a cunning scheme came to her. She grinned evilly as she glanced at her son and then back at the three girls. She gestured toward Naruto. He sighed as he realized this and walked over to her. She waited for him to stop in front of her while grinning. "Yes?" he inquired, unsure of her desires. "Well, we need your opinion?" Yami asked, grinning at him. With a perplexed expression, Naruto asked, "Why do you need my opinion?" She said, "I don't need your opinion," and shook her head. "They need your opinion." She gestured to the girls. "On what?" a bewildered Naruto asked. With a sigh, Yami dragged him over to the dressing room and seated him on one of the couches there. "Just sit here and wait." With a nod, Naruto observed his mother going to speak with the girls. He was curious about what they were discussing, and he could tell by their expression that they were anxious about something. He observed as they approached and Yami pushed them into separate dressing rooms. After turning to face her son, she said, "You're going to enjoy this." Naruto was left staring at 3 closed doors as Yami grinned and moved to another area of the store. Nodoka was freaking out in her dressing room while Naruto waited. She blushed when Yami approached and explained her plans to them. She thought to herself, "I can't do this." Then she heard the door next to her open. She saw Ayaka emerge from the dressing room in a very attractive black dress with ruffles. There was a train in the back, and the front ended at the knee. Nodoka observed how well it displayed her body. With a seductive smile, Ayaka approached Naruto and spun around before asking, "What do you think?" She was so beautiful that Naruto couldn't stop staring at her. Her beauty was flawlessly displayed by the dress. He said, "You look great." He had finally woken up from his daze. Ayaka joyfully replied, "Thank you, I'll think I get this one." Naruto merely nodded and observed her return to the dressing room. Nodoka was upset that Ayaka had asked his opinion first and that he liked her outfit. Among the dresses she had selected, she noticed one that drew her attention. The sundress, which tied around her neck, was light blue. She made the decision and began to transform. Unable to decide which of the numerous dresses she had brought with her to show Naruto, Zazie sat in the dressing room contemplating which one to try. Nodoka had completed her transformation as she made her selection. She was pleased with how she looked when she looked in the mirror. She opened the door slowly and left. Naruto observed her as she approached him from outside. The dress draped over her body, softly embracing her curves, and he was mesmerized by her beauty. She blushed profusely as she briefly demonstrated the dress for him, but she didn't mind. Naruto's gaze on her was one that she adored. She was ecstatic because she could see the love in his eyes for her. "What do you think of this one?" she said softly as she leaned down to give him a good view of her cleavage. He said, "You look great," blushing. Nodoka turned red and spun around. With a tender tone, she said, "I'm happy you like it. Please wait while I try on a few more." With a stupid nod, Naruto watched her return to her dressing room. At last, the last door opened, revealing Zazie in a sultry red gown. It gave her body a tight hug, showcasing her amazing figure. He could see a lot of skin because it was so low cut. She was wearing that dress, and Naruto couldn't help but feel a little attracted to her. He hastily pulled his jacket over his lap to conceal his expanding tent. Zazie swayed slightly to her hips as she approached him. As she walked, Naruto tried to relax, but she was making him feel so aroused. After giving him a brief demonstration, she sat in his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. She said, smiling seductively. "Wow," was the only word that Naruto said after remaining silent for a moment. Zazie grinned and gave him a kiss. Before Zazie broke away, they were briefly engrossed in one another. She got back to her feet and headed for her dressing room. She turned before entering and said, Naruto flushed and tried to shake the thought of taking Zazie into the dressing room at this very moment. Before going into her dressing room, Zazie blew him a kiss and smiled. Sitting there, Naruto tried to maintain his composure. Sasuke had come to Mahora in search of Naruto while he was with the girls. He sensed Negi's powerful magic as he moved about, and a plan began to take shape in his head. Silently, he followed the young boy and waited until he was by himself. Then, after a long practice day, Negi walked back toward the dorms. While Asuna trained with Setsuna to improve her sword skills, he was alone. He sensed an evil presence all around him as he walked. He accelerated the pace, but the sensation remained. He quickly spun around after sensing a presence behind him but finding nothing. He let out a sigh and screamed before losing consciousness. Red and black eyes gazing into his soul were the last thing he saw. Before long, Naruto and the girls were back in the room. He had numerous storage scrolls with him, the majority of which contained his mother's purchases. Nodoka was quite pleased with the day's progress and eager for more. Ayaka was planning strategies to get Naruto to look at her alone because she was happy that she had captured his attention. At last, Zazie was attempting to avoid thinking about Naruto tearing a particular red dress off of her body. He didn't see the three girls approaching him as he put everything down. He was kissed passionately by Zazie, who was the first to approach him. She quickly melted into Naruto's arms as he kissed her back. Ayaka took Zazie's place and gave him another passionate kiss as he broke away. At last, Nodoka approached him and planted a kiss on his lips, her lips moving in a dance. Naruto stood there for a moment after they were done, then he fell to the ground, grinning broadly. Sasuke stood beside Negi and his Pactio partners, who were now under hypnosis. He would exact his retribution on Naruto very soon. In the quad, Naruto waited for his date by a fountain. A letter asking for a meeting was sent to him. He decided to meet the person after making sure it wasn't Evangeline. The handwriting and the delivery of the latter gave him the impression that it was written by a woman. Weary of this, Nodoka and the other attempted to dissuade him. He merely grinned and assured them that he would not harm them in any way. He now stood and awaited the appearance of the unknown individual. From behind Naruto came a voice that said, "I am glad you could make it," causing him to turn and see Chachimaru standing there. She was dressed in a skirt that accentuated her legs and a light blue top. She simply nodded when Naruto asked, "So you sent me the letter?" She put her arm through his, and he said, "Well then shall we be off?" Meanwhile, Chachimaru was the target of jealous glares from 3 sets of eyes. Soon after, they trailed the two as they left. Chachimaru leaned into Naruto, and he allowed it. They turned into the park after walking down the street. The 3 people who were following them were furious as they moved silently down the lane. "A date in the park," Nodoka uttered sorrowfully. "That the date I wanted." Pulling Nodoka along, Ayaka said, "Will you stop it and help us follow them so we can make sure she doesn't do anything?" Zazie turned around after walking ahead of them and said, "I know that." Angrily, Ayaka said. Zazie sighed and gestured toward the road. Chachimaru and Naruto were not present. Ayaka wept anime style, "No, we lost them." Zazie agreed with Nodoka when he said, "Maybe it was for the best." Ayaka yelled at them as they left, "Traitors." Zazie remarked, as they made their way back to the dormitories. After settling into a little cafe close to the campus, Naruto and Chachimaru waited for their food in silence. "How are you doing, Chachimaru?" In an attempt to break the silence, Naruto asked. When asked, "I have been doing well," she replied. He said, "That's great," and they fell back into silence. She knew he made her feel something she had never felt before, and when they kissed, she felt like she was on fire. Chachimaru looked at the blonde and wondered why she was asking him out in this way. She wanted to be close to him and experience that feeling again. Naruto said, "So how the little bloodsucker," with disdain. As she recalled her master's tirades about how delicious his blood was, she responded, "She is doing well, she still craves your blood though." As he shuddered, Naruto exclaimed, "Oh joy! What makes you dislike vampires?" Chachimaru inquired. This took Naruto by surprise, but he responded, "Let's say over the years I have had a couple of run-ins with them that I rather forget." Chachimaru laughed and remarked, "I'm going to assume they all adored your blood." "Pretty much," was his response. Chachimaru remarked, "Well, hopefully you will find one who hates your blood." "That'll be the day," he sighed. According to Chachimaru, yes it will. They quickly got into a very light conversation and began laughing and talking. They soon came and went, but they continued to talk. When he and Chachimaru started laughing, Naruto remarked, then he said, "That was the power of youth." He realized that this was the first time he had ever heard Chachimaru laugh so hard that he gradually stopped laughing and turned to face Chachimaru. He was looking at her, and Chachimaru blushed a little. "Is there something on my face?" Wondering if she was being judged, she asked. "You are aware that you have a lovely laugh. It sounds heavenly," he said, grinning. Thank you." Chachimaru smiled as she blushed and smoke began to emerge from her head. He got up and held out his hand, saying, "You're very welcome. Shall we go now?" Grinning, she took his hand. The two found themselves facing a tall structure that bore the sign, Ace's Ballroom. "What brings us here?" Chachimaru inquired, opening the door with a smile. Naruto said, "It's a secret." "I don't like secrets," Chachimaru declared. "This is a good secret," Naruto said in a comforting voice, and Chachimaru simply nodded before following him inside. As they went down the hallway, she heard music coming from the room at the end, and when they arrived, she saw people dancing, all of them flying across the dance floor in time with the music. A voice from the other side of the room said, "Welcome," and a woman with short green hair and a big smile approached. She had a very attractive figure and exuded grace. "My name is Asa. Are you here for some lessons?" With a smile, Naruto replied, "Yes we are." "Amazing. What style? Ballroom or Latin?" Asa smiled and asked. His response was, "I say a mixture of both. How does that sound, Chachimaru?" With a flush, Chachimaru said, "It's fine with me." Asa pulled Chachimaru away from Naruto, saying, "Excellent, but first we need to get your partner ready." Chachimaru was about to pull away when she sensed Asa's warmth. but she allowed her to guide her away from the blonde. "What are your plans?" Chachimaru questioned Asa. They went into a side room after Asa said, "Just something that will make that young man you came with drool." As he waited for the two to return, Naruto stood against the wall and his thoughts drifted to Chachimaru. They had been friendly since they first met, even though she had been hurt during Evangeline's attack on him, and she didn't harbor any resentment. He smiled as he recalled his meetings with her, and he recalled the time he dreamed that they had kissed back at the tree. It felt so real to him that he wanted to kiss her again. He reprimanded himself, saying, "No bad Naruto. She just a friend, but a very attractive friend." He was preoccupied with his own thoughts when he didn't notice Asa and Chachimaru approaching him. Naruto turned his head when Asa said, "Excuse me." He blushed upon seeing Chachimaru, who was wearing a red dress with no straps and high heels, and he couldn't take his eyes off of her. "How'd I appear?" Naruto could only nod his head in response to her question, and Asa grinned. "See, I told you he would be speechless," she told Chachimaru. "No, can you get him moving? Our lesson will be starting soon." She shook him and said, "Naruto, come on, the class is starting." "Oh right, sorry," Naruto said, blushing, as he jolted back to reality. They walked out onto the dance floor after Chachimaru said, "It's fine." They noticed they were the only people there when they looked around. "Where is everybody?" Naruto inquired. Asa smiled. "Oh, them their lesson ended when I was with Chachimaru," she continued, "so it a private lesson for you too." Naruto said, blushing, "Oh, well that's nice." Chachimaru also blushed when he saw this. "Just us?" She smiled as she thought. Asa turned to face the two and said, "Now let's get started. We'll start by learning the waltz. I now want you to do as I do." "First is the box step," Asa said with a smile after Naruto and Chachimaru nodded. They practiced the steps separately, and while it was very easy for Naruto to learn, Chachimaru struggled to get it right because her mind didn't understand the steps well, causing her to stumble occasionally. They walked over after Asa saw this and determined the best course of action. "Both of you come here." Asa smiled and took out a blindfold, covering Chachimaru's eyes with it. Chachimaru asked, "What are you doing?" "Now Naruto, I want you to lead Chachimaru around her dance floor, and Chachimaru trust Naruto that you have to do." Asa pushed her in Naruto's direction and said, "Just trust me." She smiled and helped them get into the right hold. Chachimaru was a little nervous, but she nodded, and Naruto saw this. "Trust me," he said, and Chachimaru nodded, and he smiled. Asa started the music, and the two of them started dancing. She was a little afraid to let him lead her, but then she remembered his words. "Trust me," he said, and she calmed down, allowing him to lead her across the dance floor. Soon, they were dancing, and as they did, Chachimaru couldn't help but feel happy as she let Naruto lead her. The music soon came to an end, and the two parted. Chachimaru removed the blindfold and turned to Naruto, who was grinning. "Great," Asa told them, "that was just amazing." They all said, "Thank you." Asa said, "Now let's move on to the next dance," and both of them nodded agreement. After mastering the fundamentals of the jive, Naruto and Chachimaru turned to their dance instructor with curiosity. "I just have one more dance to teach you, the Viennese waltz," Asa said, adding, "You both did so well today." The two nodded and followed Asa as she demonstrated the steps, but she also taught them turns and other moves. She concluded her lesson once more, and Asa began the music. Now, the Viennese waltz is a very intimate dance, so prepare to be very close. She said, "Let the music flow through you." They began slowly but soon spread across the dance floor, and Chachimaru could feel her feelings for him intensifying as they danced. Even when the music stopped, they continued to dance all over the dance floor, and when Naruto dipped Chachimaru and looked directly into her eyes, he could see her soul and couldn't help but want to get closer. He leaned in and kissed her back, and they remained that way for a few moments before breaking up. He slowly released her and couldn't help but smile. She was the last person who could steal his heart, and he was the one who could make her feel loved. Asa exclaimed, "That was beautiful," with tears running down her cheeks. "You two were just wonderful." They blushed together as they said, "Thank you." After saying, "Come back anytime," Asa turned to face Chachimaru and said, "You can also keep the dress." Hand in hand, they walked out of the dance studio after she said, "Thank you." In joyful silence, they strolled down the street before coming to rest beneath the world tree. "Seem we will always end up here," Naruto grinned. In response, Chachimaru said, "So it seems." With a, "Well I glad," he drew her in for another kiss. A voice behind them said, "Well isn't that just wonderful," which made the two turn. Sasuke and Mana were standing there, and Sasuke just stared at them with disgust. Well, it seemed the Dobi finally found a girl," Sasuke said. and Mana appeared to be in some sort of daze. Naruto stepped in front of Chachimaru and asked, "What do you want, Teme?" Sasuke said, "Simple your death." Naruto charged him, blocked his initial blow, and threw a left hook at his face. Sasuke ducked the punch and attempted to knee Naruto in the stomach, but Naruto blocked and used the momentum to gain some distance. Naruto said, "You never know when to quit, do you?" and assumed his stance. Sasuke roared, "I am a Uchiha, I always win in the end." Chachimaru had her hands full fighting Mana during that battle. What's the reason behind this? After avoiding a barrage of bullets, she asked Mana. Mana said, "Master orders," and continued to fire. Chachimaru continued to dodge her blows and activate her rockets, rushed Mana, grabbed her gun, snapped it in two, and proceeded to knock her unconscious before turning to watch the battle between Naruto and Sasuke and being caught in a huge explosion that shook the entire school. Sasuke stood with cuts all over his body, while Naruto stood with blood streaming down one side of his arm. Naruto laughed as he remarked, "Getting sluggish, Teme." Sasuke retorted, "Shut up, Dobi." He stumbled as he took a step forward, saying, "Damn, you got me good." "Seems that way," Naruto said with a smile. "Now to finish it." He leapt forward, his fist cocked and covered in shadows, and threw a death punch at Sasuke, who managed to sidestep but was struck hard in the arm, leaving a black mark all over his arm. Naruto remarked, "Damn, missed," as the darkness dissipated from his fist. Holding his arm in agony, Sasuke uttered, "Damn you, Teme. I'll kill you." "You keep saying that, but I still hear." Naruto replied, "You must really suck at killing people." When Sasuke saw Chachimaru, he said, "You Dobi. If I can't kill you now, I just settle for her." Sasuke lunged ahead and rushed Chachimaru, saying, "No." After saying this, Naruto ran after him, but it was too late. Sasuke's attack destroyed Chachimaru. Sasuke said, "That will teach you," and took off. Naruto said, "Chachimaru," while he held her head. She remarked, "It seems I am dying," as a tiny tear trickled down her cheek. "How is that? I thought," she said. He tried to reassure her by saying, "You're not going to die." With her eyes slowly closing, she said, "You are lying. I just want to tell you, She completely shut down. "Damn it," he said, but then he sensed her soul materialize beside him. "Naruto," she said, and when he saw her, he couldn't help but blush. She was stunning, and although she appeared to be a typical human in her soul form, she had a charming smile on her face. He remarked, "Good you haven't moved on by yourself," with exasperation. "What are we going to do now?" she asked. "It seems that way." Naruto said, "This," and his ears and tails materialized. Chachimaru leapt up and began massaging his ears before he could begin the ceremony, saying, "Cute." Trying not to show that he was enjoying it, he said, "Can you please do that after I finish?" She said, "Oh sorry." "Thanks," he said, leaning in to bite her neck. She was encased in his tails, and soon a bright light filled the room. Chachimaru, in her new body, sat in front of him. She was fully human, but she was surrounded by armor. He smiled and said, "Warrior, you're my beautiful warrior." She gave him a kiss while grinning. Chachimaru could see that he was anxious and squeezed his hand to reassure him that everything would be okay. Naruto smiled gratefully at the gesture, but soon approached the door. Naruto and Chachimaru walked silently towards Evangeline Kotege, knowing that her pact with the little vampire was over because she died and made a pact with him. He thought, "This is going to suck." As they entered, they saw that the girl was laughing and watching TV. She didn't notice the two of them for a few minutes until Chachimaru touched her shoulder, at which point she turned to face them and realized that Chachimaru was a human. What took place? She gave Naruto the evil eye as she asked. As Eva listened, she turned to face Chachimaru and marveled at her transformation from the robotic partner she had previously had to a beautiful, living, breathing girl. Naruto simply looked back and smiled at her, saying, "Well," and explaining everything that had happened that day. He concluded his story and turned to face the small blonde, wondering what reaction she would have. Eva remarked, "So you were telling me instead of an android partner I'm going to have a living partner?" Naruto blushed slightly. "You went from having an android partner to having a living and breathing friend. She is no longer your partner," he said, scooting closer to Chachimaru. After a brief period of silence, Evangeline erupted, saying, "What do you mean I no longer have a partner?" "I was going to explain that." When she calmed down, Evangeline looked at Naruto and sat down, still furious. "Okay. The reason she is no longer your partner is because she had to make a pact with me to give her a new body. For someone that small, she sure packed a lot of power in her lungs," Naruto said. "My pacts would take precedence over yours as a Shinigami, rendering them null and void." So she's your current partner? Evangelina's eyes glinted evilly as she spoke. He didn't like the look she was giving him, so he said, yes. Her statement caused Naruto to look at her in disbelief. Then I demand compensation. After a few moments of being motionless, he said, you want what? I want compensation, Evangeline said with a smile, as though it were the most straightforward thing the world had ever heard. You took my partner from me, and I am demanding something of equal value in exchange. Weary of Evangeline, Naruto looked at her bewilderedly and said, like what? Evangeline grinned and pretended to consider it, but Naruto knew exactly what she wanted. Well, I need help finding a new partner, so until then you will allow me to drink your blood. In the hopes that she would accept the offer, he said, how about I help you find a new partner instead? She responded, making Naruto deadpan, no it my offer or no deal. It will be fine, Chachimaru reassured him as she glanced at her Naruto. She didn't say what condition the blood needs to be in, she said in a whisper. I love you so much right now, Naruto said, grinning and kissing her on the cheek. He then turned back to face Evangeline and said, okay, it's a deal then. As he and Chachimaru stood up, he said, I will send you the first few bags in a couple days. She smiled and started to drink, but he stopped her. Evangeline asked, what do you mean send a few bags in a few days? He smiled and said, you mentioned that you wanted to drink my blood, but you didn't specify that it had to be fresh. Though she knew he was correct, Evangeline went to argue. She frowned and said, okay, but she wanted it as soon as possible. Will do, Naruto said with a smile as he opened the door to let Chachimaru pass. After saying, damn loopholes, she headed to her room in the hopes that her new blood supply would arrive shortly. To explain what had transpired between them that day, Naruto and Chachimaru strolled over to his room. When they arrived at the room and went inside, they discovered it was empty. With a sigh, Naruto took a seat on the couch, with Chachimaru sitting next to him. Before long, she was putting her head on his shoulder, and the two of them dozed off on the couch. Ayaka, Zazie, and Nodoka were shopping at the time of this. They decided to go out after waiting for Naruto to return after he was lost on his date with Chachimaru. At the time of their fancy date with Naruto, they were trying on various dresses in a dress store. Before they realized the time, they were all enjoying themselves. Nodoka picked up the dress she wanted and said, we should head back. After nodding, Zazie and Ayaka paid for their purchases and left for home. Before long, they realized that everyone was giggling at them. When Ayaka asked her friends, what up with them? They simply shrugged. They quickly returned to their room, put their bags down, and entered to find Naruto sitting on the couch with a pretty girl dozing next to him, her head leaning against his shoulder. With a tinge of jealousy, they all asked themselves, who the hell is she? They wanted to question their actions and wake them up. Unfortunately, they allowed the two to sleep because they didn't want to enrage Naruto. A short time later, when Naruto started to wake up and felt a burden on his shoulder, he turned to face Chachimaru, who was sleeping, and grinned. He turned after giving her a forehead kiss to find Zazie, Ayaka, and Nodoka standing in front of him. Ayaka's smile chilled Naruto to the core. Glad to see you're awake. In an attempt to find a way out of this situation without being admitted to the hospital, he asked, hey, how are you? Zazie asked, glancing first at him and then at Chachimaru. Ayaka interrupted Naruto as he turned to face her, saying, can you explain her please? Her tone was slightly irate. Naruto said, well, but Chachimaru began to stir and rubbed her eyes. She looked back as everyone else looked at her. She smiled and said, hello everyone. Hello. Nodoka smiled back, but Ayaka's glare swiftly erased the smile. Ayaka gave Chachimaru a stern look and asked, and who might you be? As for why Ayaka didn't recognize her, Chachimaru remarked, I know you quite well Ayaka, we are in the same class. Ayaka started to say, I have never met you before in my life. Naruto interrupted her. You know her, he replied, this is Chachimaru. What? Exclaimed the three girls as they closely examined her and realized it was Chachimaru, but without her typical ears. While they screamed, Naruto and Chachimaru shielded their ears and waited for them to stop. Each of the three girls turned to face their boyfriend with a serious expression. Ayaka exclaimed, explain now. With a sigh, Naruto recounted everything that had transpired during their date. He did not go into detail about their activities until their altercation with Sasuke. At last, he described the agreement they had made and how Chachimaru got to be this way. This caused a surprising response from everyone. Despite his initial actions, Ayaka knew that he was saving the life of someone who loved him as much as she did. Although Nodoka was relieved to be safe, she felt a little envious of her for having a deal with Naruto. At last, Zazie grinned, glad that another agreement had been made and that she now had support in case something went wrong. After observing them for a short while, Naruto grinned. As the girls began to converse and laugh, he thought to himself, well, it seems they're taking it well. Chachimaru had joined the group a few weeks prior, and everyone was enjoying themselves. To their delight, he went on a date with a different girl each night. Despite the fact that life had calmed down considerably, Naruto could not get rid of the uneasy feeling. Nearly everyone in the school was staring at him and his group, and he would occasionally notice this. He was aware that something negative was about to occur and that it would happen soon. When he woke up, he couldn't help but smile at his girls. However, he quickly turned to see his mother standing there holding a camera. She smiles when she realizes he's awake, then vanishes in a puff of black smoke. With a growl, he rose and made his way to the restroom. Despite his hasty preparations for the day, he couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling that something terrible was about to happen. After preparing breakfast, he waited for the others to emerge, all of them prepared for the day. Before long, everyone was awake and prepared for the day, and they were leaving. They observed that it was too quiet as they made their way to the school. They were the only people on the road. They kept walking down the street, but the only sound they could hear was the echo of their own footsteps. As he took a kunai out of his pouch in preparation for an attack, Naruto remarked, "I don't like this." Zazie was scanning the area in preparation for a silent Kido at any moment. In order to avoid being caught off guard by an attack, Chachimaru had called forth her twin short blades. At last, they made their way into the campus's main quad and made a stop at the fountain. Usually, a lot of people would be out and about at this time, but it was as quiet as night. Sensing that something was amiss, Naruto called forth 2 Hashin kunai and handed them to Ayaka and Nodoka. As he gave them to each girl, he said, "Hold on to these. Just touch the handle and think of the room and it will take you there. I want you to promise me if something happens you will do that." Knowing that he was doing this for their protection, Nodoka and Ayaka nodded and said, "I promise." He smiled in return. He said, "That is my girls," and got to his feet. He nodded as he turned to face Zazie and Chachimaru, who formed a triangle with Ayaka and Nodoka. They all jumped when Naruto's phone rang as they were walking. He picked up the phone hastily. "Yes," he said in a whisper. On the other end was his mother. "You need to get back here now." He asked, "Why?" and then abruptly noticed some girls approaching them. When he saw that they were brandishing sticks and other crude weapons, his smile quickly turned to a frown. In order to stop an attack, Naruto dropped his phone as the charge. He knocked the girl unconscious and swiftly disarmed her. Soon, he, Zazie, and Chachimaru were gradually losing ground as they fought off the horde of girls. He would have killed them where they stood if they had been his normal enemies, but since they were students under someone else's authority, he was unable to do them any harm. He exclaimed, "Nodoka, Zazie, go now," and saw them both vanish in an instant. With his mother watching over him, he sighed with relief as they made their way back to the room. He quickly focused on the assailants and became more aggressive. Nearly all of the attackers were quickly eliminated, but more appeared to be on the way. He quickly vanished after grabbing Chachimaru and Zazie. They landed and took a seat on the roof of one of the campus's taller buildings. He sat there and exclaimed, "What the hell is going on?" Zazie sighed, leaning against him. He ran his hand through his hair and said, "I hear yay." Zazie's phone rang shortly after, and she answered. It was Yami. "Yeah?" she asked as she gave Naruto the phone. Her voice was worried as she asked, "Are you okay? Nodoka told me what happened and I couldn't get you on your phone." As they sat there, he said, "We are fine. We were just attacked by some students but I don't know why." "Your old friend has been busy," Yami said gravely, adding, "I think I have an idea about that." "Oh no," said Naruto. Yami gazed out the window and remarked, "Yes, it appears that our friend Sasuke has mesmerized the majority of the campus." A gigantic Sharingan appears to be hovering over the school. When Naruto saw the big red eye above the school building, he looked up and used his Shinigami vision. "Damn!" Naruto exclaimed angrily. "What's happening?" Chachimaru inquired after observing Naruto's face. As he began to call forth his weapons, Naruto declared, "We must put an end to this now because Sasuke is making his move." The three of them were soon prepared for combat and making their way to the school after Zazie and Chachimaru nodded and activated the pacts. Naruto and the girls sped toward the school, dodging the groups of students patrolling the campus. They did so quickly, and then a flash of lightning struck the trio, scattering them. They fell to the ground, and when they looked up, Negi and his partners were staring down at them with glassy eyes. "Oh, this is not good," Naruto said, swerving to the side as Negi cast another spell at the group, and they parted ways, only for Setsuna to cut off Zazie and Asuna to cut off Chachimaru. Mana and Keed confronted Naruto as Negi cast spells at him from a distance. Zazie vs Asuna. Asuna looked at Zazie blankly and said, "My master has ordered your death." She raised her sword high in the air and dodged to the side, trying to cast a spell, but Asuna pressed her attack before she could finish it, causing Zazie to flip away and land on a tree branch. She quickly called forth a pair of kunai in her hands, blocking Asuna's slash and pushing her back to gain space so she could cast, but Asuna wouldn't let it and pressed her attack again. She hoped that it would be enough to stop the girl, but Asuna got back up and charged. Zazie pushed her attack with a different combination of punches and kicks, causing more damage to her opponent, but Asuna seemed to not want to go down. She rolled away from an overhead strike and hid in the trees, slowly healing the cut on her chest and hoping that Asuna wouldn't find her. Zazie said, but it fell on deaf ears. She dodged another slash and knocked Asuna back. "It is all over, Zazie." Asuna replied, "My master will kill Naruto and you as well." She chopped down the last tree, and Asuna saw Zazie sitting there, shivering as she heard Asuna approach. She raised her blade above her head, prepared to kill Zazie, and said, "Found you." Setsuna vs Chachimaru. A battle of blades was raging between Chachimaru and Setsuna, with Chachimaru struggling against the smaller girl and considering how to push her back. "Give it up, Chachimaru," said Setsuna. "Sasuke. Sama will win and destroy Naruto." After pushing Setsuna away and activating her rockets, Chachimaru declared, "I will not let that happen." She then charged forward, pushing Setsuna back, and they soon found themselves in a battle of blades, with Chachimaru losing because Setsuna was the superior blade master and her armor covered in cuts from her blade. "Hyaka Rairan," Setsuna said, leaping back and sheathing her blade before charging Chachimaru, who felt numerous cuts in a matter of seconds. Chachimaru stood there for a moment before collapsing to the ground, blood oozing from numerous wounds. Setsuna stood up and declared, "It is over." Then, she heard a voice and turned to see Chachimaru standing up, blood dripping through her armor. "It will take more than that to take me down," Chachimaru said. She took her stance and breathed. Engage full battle mode. A bright light suddenly surrounded her. It soon died down, revealing a fully armored Chachimaru. She wore a helmet that had her signature antenna sticking out on each side, her chest wave cover in a light blue armor that covered most of her top. Her shoulder guards were slime but had 2 small holes in each. Her arms and legs were all covered in small boosters could be seen on her back and legs. She slowly lifted off the ground and suddenly charged forward and hit Setsuna straight in the stomach. She doubled over in pain as the air was pushed out of her body. Chachimaru not want to give up her advantage and continued to attack Setsuna. She knocked her into the air and flew up before throwing her down to the ground. Setsuna hit the ground creating a small crater, but Chachimaru wasn't done. She landed over Setsuna and continued to pummel her into the ground. Setsuna fell unconscious as Chachimaru continued to attack. Chachimaru took some wire, tied Setsuna up, and left her on top of a building because she saw that she was unconscious and didn't want to leave her there to pose a threat. After examining Setsuna's battered and broken body, she said, "I'm sorry." She got up and raced back to the fight after spotting Zazie in distress and turning on her boosters to get to her downed friend. "My love, be safe," she said, turning to face Naruto, who was fighting. "I coming, Zazie." Zazie watched as the sword rolled to the side and came down, then she pushed herself up and gave Asuna a silent shikaho before running a little to gain some distance. Asuna was approaching her when she vanished into the shadows, and she saw the orange-haired girl searching for her. Zazie grinned as he watched her opponent. Looking around for Zazie, Asuna said, "Come out, Zazie. Just give up, master will make your end painless." Zazie listened to Asuna and shook her head, but she had no intention of giving up, so she moved silently through the trees, settled on a branch behind Asuna, put her hands together, and sent a large blast of yellow lightning at her. Asuna heard the blast and dodged to the side, but she had already faded back into the background. She watched the trees, wondering where the next attack would come from, and then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a large red ball fly towards her. She took a step to the side, allowing the ball to fly past, and then she headed towards a clearing, wanting a better area for the fight. Zazie followed, but she stayed at the tree line so she could watch what Asuna did next. After a few minutes, Asuna didn't move, so Zazie decided to test her defense, so she sent a barrage of Shikako spells at her and watched as she dodged or blocked them all. When she saw Chachimaru land in front of Asuna, she scowled and pondered what she would do next. She grinned and made a mental connection with her, saying, Chachimaru grinned back. She turned to face Asuna and said, "Yes, it's good to see that you're okay as well." Zazie nodded and observed Asuna turning to face Chachimaru. "I distract her, you take her out from behind." Asuna glanced at Chachimaru and remarked, "It seemed that Setsuna failed." Chachimaru nodded, "Now all that is left is you." She then charged forward, but Asuna blocked her first blow with her blade, sidestepped a punch to the face, and spun around to bring her blade down on Chachimaru, who blocked it with her arm guard. Chachimaru pushed Asuna back, creating some space, and then she activated her thrusters and charged forward. Asuna tried to push her back, but she lacked the strength, so she rolled to the side and gained some distance from Chachimaru, but she managed to avoid a red ball. When she turned, she saw Zazie standing behind the tree line, getting ready to cast another spell. The force of the attack sent Asuna flying across the field, and she stood up slowly, breathing heavily, thinking, "Damn." Asuna dodged another attack and turned to face Zazie when she was blindsided by Chachimaru. She managed to bring her sword up to block an attack from Chachimaru, but she was struck by a red ball that sent her flying. With a smile on her face, Chachimaru watched Asuna struggle to stand, her breathing labored, her body covered in cuts and bruises, most of her clothes ripped, leaving her exhausted in half. Naked. Knowing that this next attack would put an end to it, Chachimaru turned to face Zazie. She said to her companion, who nodded, "After my attack, trap her with your strongest binding spell." Chachimaru turned toward Asuna and took off at high speed. Asuna watched as Chachimaru appeared out of nowhere and punched her in the stomach, causing her to lose all consciousness as she flew back from the blow. She tried to stay conscious, but she was unable to keep her eyes open, so she turned to see Chachimaru approaching her as she felt a glowing white chain bind her. She turned to see Zazie standing over her hands together, and she glanced at the two with a blank expression on her face before slipping into darkness. Asuna stopped moving and Chachimaru knew she was out, so she picked her up and flew her to the same building she had left Setsuna on. Zazie rested while she was gone, letting out a sigh as she leaned against a tree, and Chachimaru came back and sat down beside Zazie. Zazie had almost lost the battle and was now attempting to refuel. Zazie nodded as she stated, "We have to find Naruto." Zazie answered, stood up, took a deep breath, and fled into the trees, with Chachimaru observing briefly before trailing behind. With Naruto sighed as he dodged another barrage of light arrows. He was getting annoyed by the consent barrage from the small red head. When he was separated from Zazie and Chachimaru, he tried to find them but was pinned down. Negi was on his staff firing off barrage after barrage of magic arrows at Naruto. Naruto dodged them but had to deal with Kid and Feiku in close range. He brushed them off like it was nothing, but they kept getting in his way. He turned and blocked a kick from Feiku and knocked her to the side, only for Kid to attack him from jumped over her only to twist in the middle of the air to dodge more arrows. Naruto turned in another kick for Feiku. Before she could create space for another attack, Naruto grabbed her leg and slammed her onto the ground. Fei felt all the air leave her body and was stunned for a moment. Naruto was about to take advantage of this when he dodged Kid's large shuriken. He spun around and grabbed it. He used the blade to block Kid kick and then spun it around to block Fei's attack. He sent Feiku flying with the flat side of the shuriken and then threw it at Negi with all his might. The small red head quickly flew to the side, not wanting to get hit by the spinning blades. He was irritated and wanted to move on, so he rushed the two and waved his hands together. "Damn," Naruto thought as he ran forward, avoiding Kid and continuing to charge until he was blown back by a wind spell for Negi. He spun away from a kick from Feiku and blocked a punch from Kid. Naruto said, "Bakudo number 63 Seijo Sabaku," and a big yellow chain materialized, encircling Feiku and Kid. They tried to break free, but the chains were too strong. Naruto grinned to himself, but he was too busy avoiding another round of attacks from the tiny mage to take it easy. He then brought his hands together. Shikaho, Hado number 31. While Naruto charged forward, he jumped and grabbed Negi off his staff, bringing him to the ground. He swiftly bound the young mage in the same Bakudo as Kid and Feiku, and as he sat down, he looked at his opponents and sighed. He cried and sent a large ball of red energy at Negi, he said. The redhead dodged to the side, but felt the shockwave of the explosion from the attack, which sent him down towards the ground. He stood up and uttered the words, "Damn you Sasuke. I will make you pay for all you have done." He turned to see Sasuke standing there, and he heard a voice behind him say, "Then make me pay. Hello Dobi." Teme. Naruto responded and rose to his feet, calling forth his scythe, and he raised his sword to face his opponent. For a brief moment, the only sound between the two fighters was the clash of blades, and they separated and looked at each other once more. As the combatants swerved once more, they were unable to conceal their smiles as Naruto charged forward and brought his blade down in a downward slash. Sasuke spun to the left and brought his sword towards Naruto's unguarded side, blocking with the pole of his scythe and pushing off, and then separated once more, looking at each other. Sasuke put his Sharingan blazing, and Naruto noticed this and tensed. Before turning to face Naruto, Sasuke demonstrated a few hand signals. Suton. Water Dragon Justu. A huge water dragon charged at Naruto as he screamed. Naruto ducked to the side, making his own hand signals, thinking, damn. Futon. Air bullets. He yelled and inhaled deeply before releasing 5 tiny air bullets at Sasuke. Sasuke sidestepped the blow and charged forward, punching Naruto in the face as he flew back a few feet before flipping in midair and landing on his feet. He attempted to punch back at Sasuke but blocked another blow. With a laugh, Sasuke sidestepped the blow and kicked Naruto in the side, knocking him back a little. Come on Dobi. You can do better than that. After scowling at his old friend, Naruto said, bring it Teme. He then demonstrated a few hand signals, saying, power limiter seal. Release. He yelled, and a dazzling light surrounded him. As the light faded, Sasuke could see Naruto clearly. He had longer hair, 2 wolf ears on top of his head, more noticeable whisker marks, and 10 flowing wolf tails waving behind him. Sasuke scowled as he looked at Naruto, who then appeared in front of him and sent him flying with a backhand to the face. He flew through the air, only to reappear, punching him into the ground, and a massive crater soon formed. Sasuke felt all the air leave his body as Naruto stood over him. Now who is the Dobi? Naruto said and formed a Rasengan in his hand and drove it into Sasuke's chest. Sasuke felt the attack grind into him and soon there was a large gaping hole in his body. Goodbye. As soon as the Sharingan's shadow dissipated, the sky turned blue. Chachimaru and Zazie arrived at Naruto and observed the damage caused by his battle, finding him standing with creator blood all over his left hand. After turning to face them and grinning, he said, it is all over, and left the creator. Zazie hurried to him and threw him to the ground, holding him tightly and refusing to let go. Chachimaru soon joined her and encircled Naruto. With a melancholy smile, he stroked their hair while gazing up at the sky and said, it over. A few days later after packing his things and looking around the room, Naruto couldn't help but smile at all the memories he had made and was sad to be leaving. After the battle, Yami told him he had to leave, and he was sad to be leaving, and when he told the girls, they were saddened. He took one last look before leaving the dorms, and he noticed that it was quiet. He sighed as he walked out of the dorms, knowing that it was best to just leave without saying goodbye too quickly. When he arrived at the entrance to the dorms, he saw 4 people waiting for him. Chachimaru, Zazie, Nodoka, and Ayaka. Hello loves. He smiled and asked, are we done? The group left a tranquil Mahora behind as they walked towards the train. Then ladies, he said, grinning as they all nodded, it is time we make our leave. When class began, a lot of people searched the area for the bodyguard and the 4 missing students, but they couldn't be found. Negi came in to discover a note on the desk that was addressed to the class. He nodded when Asuna said, open it. He did so and read the letter's contents. After a brief period of silence, he began reading. To Class 3A, I regret having to say goodbye in this manner, but I must go somewhere else. Even though our time together was brief, I will always remember how much fun we had. I hope you all have happy lives and thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you. Regards, Naruto. Everyone. Negi said, Nodoka, Zazie, Chachimaru, and Ayaka have all left the school. Everyone stared at him in disbelief, and he added, they say they are sorry they couldn't say goodbye in person but they love all of you. Many of the girls were reportedly sad to see him go, but Negi wasn't finished. The students were quiet and in shock that they had lost some of their friends, but they also knew that they were moving to a better place. After 10 years, Naruto, who had taken over his mother's job as Yami 3 years prior, was sitting at a desk going through a stack of paperwork. He detested the amount of paperwork he had to complete and sobbed to himself as he finished another stack. What made me accept this position? He pondered, but the door suddenly flew open, cutting him off. Daddy. A collective of voices cried and Naruto was swarmed by a gang of small children. He fell out of his chair and looked at all the bodies that were on top of him. First there was a girl about 5 years old with silver hair, blue slitted eyes, wolf ears, and 2 tails. This was his daughter Zell. She was the first child from Zazie and himself. She smiled as she looked at her father and held him close. Next was a pair of boys, one with green hair and the other with blonde. They both sported wolf ears and tails. These were the twin Choji and Shu. Both were 4 years old and their mother was Chachimaru. Next was another girl, she had blue hair that covered her face and a book in her hand. This was Naneo. She was 5 and always loved to read. Her mother was Nodoka and he couldn't help but smile. Finally there was his youngest. She was 3 years old with long blonde hair. Her name was Ayame. She smiled at her father and held him close. Her mother was Ayaka and he couldn't help but be ecstatic when she was born. A voice said, "Children, get off your father," and they all turned to see their mothers standing at the door. They had grown up over the past 10 years, and Naruto couldn't help but smile because they were all lovely and loved him. Everyone laughed as he got up with a child on his legs and in his arms. Ayame rode on his back, and walked towards their mothers with a big smile on his face. "It's okay," he said, smiling. "I need the distraction anyway."
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.